Thought subtraction is one of the most overlooked yet radically effective mental techniques for calming the mind and reclaiming inner power. It works by doing the opposite of what modern self-help often suggests. Instead of layering on affirmations, positive mantras, or forced gratitude, this approach begins with removal, systematically stripping away intrusive thoughts until only stillness remains. In that silence, what's real begins to surface. Thought subtraction. The average person thinks between 60,000 to 80,000 thoughts a day. Most of them are noise, loops of worry, regret, anticipation, self-doubt. Thought subtraction doesn't try to replace these thoughts. It watches them rise and then removes them one by one like pulling weeds from a garden. It asks, what thought is not serving me? Then it lets that thought dissolve without replacing it, and again, until the mind starts to understand that its value isn't in how much it thinks, but in how clearly it sees. This technique turns the usual idea of mental work inside out. Most people try to solve overthinking with more thinking, but thought subtraction uses a different strategy: clarity through absence. You don't chase peace, you carve out the chaos that hides it. One thought, then another. Slowly, the chatter thins, the internal weather settles, and then comes the paradox. The more thoughts are subtracted, the more control returns. Suddenly, it's not the thoughts choosing you, it's you choosing thought. That shift changes everything. In that stillness, emotional strength emerges, not as a performance, but as a baseline, not as effort, but as your natural state, a state that's been buried under too many thoughts for too long. Reverse visualization. Reverse visualization is a mental technique that flips the traditional law of attraction mindset on its head. Instead of vividly imagining success, it dares the mind to walk through failure on purpose. It invites the brain to rehearse worst-case scenarios, not to become negative, but to take away fear's power by exposing its bluff. The human brain doesn't know the difference between what's vividly imagined and what's real. That's why visualizing a goal can trigger motivation. But it's also why fears haunt us. They feel real because we've never looked them in the eye. Reverse visualization exploits this quirk. It says, let's not avoid the fear. Let's drag it out. Let's rehearse the failure in detail, the embarrassment, the loss, the what-ifs, and then something strange happens. The mind, expecting to spiral, instead starts to calm, because what was once vague and terrifying becomes defined, smaller, containable, survivable. Instead of being a slave to anxiety, the brain begins to build resilience. When you mentally live through rejection, loss, or embarrassment ahead of time, it stops holding emotional leverage over you. It's already happened, in your head, and you're still standing. It's no longer a black hole. It's a scenario, a script, a story you've read and folded back on the shelf. The power here lies in disarming anticipation. Most people don't fear failure itself. They fear the unknown shape of it. Reverse visualization gives it shape. It steals the thunder from what-ifs, and in doing so, it creates a psychological freedom that pure positive thinking rarely achieves. Because when you know you can walk through the fire and keep going, nothing burns the same way again. Emotional reframing loop. The emotional reframing loop is the secret lever most people never touch. The ability to take a raw emotion and spin it into fuel, not friction. It begins with a single decision: to reinterpret what you feel, not to deny it, not to escape it, but to rename it. When anxiety arrives, instead of saying, "I'm nervous," the loop starts by saying, "I'm ready." When fear whispers, it answers, "This is energy." When doubt arises, it reframes, "This is a challenge, not a threat." What makes this technique powerful isn't the reframe itself, it's the repetition. It's the loop, the deliberate act of conditioning the mind to translate discomfort into momentum again and again until it becomes automatic. Over time, the brain doesn't just hear new words, it starts to believe them. The emotional wiring gets rewired. What was once panic becomes preparation. What was once shame becomes a signpost. Most people wait to feel confident before they act. The emotional reframing loop teaches the opposite. Act as if the emotion means something useful, and the mind will follow. This isn't delusion, it's redirection. The brain is a meaning-making machine, and the meanings we attach to emotions decide whether we freeze or flow. By looping a new narrative, overriding the old one, not just once, but constantly, you build a bridge out of emotional paralysis. Every time fear rises, it becomes a cue, not a cage. Every time stress pulses, it becomes a signal, not a sentence. And in that loop, a new identity forms, one that doesn't fear emotion, but speaks its language fluently, bends it like light, and turns reaction into mastery. Mental time collapse. Mental time collapse is the art of shrinking the gap between who you are and who you're becoming by dragging your future self into the present. It's not just visualization, it's embodiment. It's standing still, yet acting as if the version of you who already succeeded is looking over your shoulder, guiding your every move. Their wisdom, their calm, their precision, you borrow it now. This trick rewires how the brain relates to time. Most people live in delay. One day, when I'm more confident, more skilled, more ready, but time collapse refuses that script. It asks, what if future me isn't far away? What if they're already here, watching, judging, teaching? The second that belief takes hold, hesitation dies. Because you stop chasing, you start channeling. Imagine you're about to quit, walk away, freeze in fear. But then, pause. What would your future self do here? The one who already built the life, overcame the odds, became unshakable. You already know. That version wouldn't fold. That version would breathe, rise, move forward with clarity. Time collapse installs that version into the now, not as an idea, but as an internal presence, a guide, a witness. Suddenly decisions become cleaner. The chaos of self-doubt quiets, because when the future is no longer someday, it becomes a mirror you answer to. And the brain, marvelously adaptive, begins to adjust to this identity. Not because it's proven, but because it's practiced enough times and it becomes real. The gap dissolves. The future folds into the now. And in that collapse, something rare is born. Urgency without panic. Vision without waiting. Mastery without delay. Delay the reaction, not the feeling. Delay the reaction, not the feeling, is a mental technique that separates emotional intelligence from emotional impulse. It teaches the mind to hold space for emotion without letting it hijack behavior. Most people try to suppress what they feel, believing that control means not feeling at all. But suppression leaks. What truly makes someone powerful is not emotional numbness, it's emotional timing. This technique invites you to feel everything, fully, honestly, intensely, but hit pause on the response. The insult lands, the anger rises, the pulse quickens, but instead of snapping, retreating, or defending, you wait. Just a few seconds, maybe 10, maybe a full breath. In that small gap, the brain recalibrates. It recognizes this is a signal, not a command. Emotion, on its own, is never the problem. It's what's done with it too soon, too fast, without thought. Reaction is often the residue of past pain colliding with present triggers. But when the reaction is delayed, the emotion softens into clarity. You might still speak, but now with weight, not heat. You might still walk away, but now with power, not panic. Delaying the reaction gives you the ability to metabolize the emotion rather than becoming it. You don't deny sadness. You don't shame your anger. You just stop letting it hold the microphone before you've heard the full message. And in doing so, you begin to master what breaks most people: impulse. Over time, this gap becomes a habit, and in that habit, an unshakable person forms. not because they feel less, but because they no longer obey every spark. They sit with the flame and decide when to burn. Reality audit. Reality audit is the mental technique of interrogating your own thoughts, ruthlessly, compassionately, and often. It's a silent question whispered in the middle of chaos. Is this real, or am I just assuming? It slices through the noise like a scalpel, peeling away anxiety, resentment, even hope, until only what's verifiably true remains. Most suffering isn't rooted in reality. It's rooted in misinterpretation. A look becomes rejection. A delay becomes disaster. A silence becomes judgment. The brain fills in gaps with stories, automatic, unchecked, and almost always wrong. The reality audit stops that spiral. It holds every thought under a spotlight. Where's the proof, it asks. What's fact, and what's fiction disguised as fear? The result is mental clarity so sharp it feels like waking from a dream, because most people live inside imagined realities, predictions of failure, assumptions about others, expectations of perfection, and they suffer, not from the truth, but from the lies they never pause to question. Reality audit doesn't offer comfort. It offers control. When you do it regularly, every thought becomes a candidate for scrutiny. Every emotional storm becomes a data point. They're ignoring me becomes they haven't responded. I'm falling behind becomes I'm moving slower today. Subtle difference, life-altering result. And over time, your mind transforms. It stops reacting to shadows and starts responding to what's actually there. It becomes a sharper, calmer, more grounded version of itself. Because truth, real, unembellished truth, is rarely as scary as the assumptions that pretend to be it. The audit doesn't quiet the mind by force. It quiets it by stripping away everything that never belonged in the first place. Curiosity injection. Curiosity injection is the act of weaponizing wonder in moments of panic, confusion, or emotional overwhelm. It's not about pretending everything's fine. It's about asking a question so powerful that fear loses its grip. When anxiety spikes, the natural instinct is to brace, to retreat, to beg for control. Curiosity shifts that impulse. It whispers something different. What can I learn here? The brain cannot be curious and afraid at the same time. These states are neurologically incompatible. Fear tightens. Curiosity opens. Fear shuts the door. Curiosity cracks it wide. That's the leverage point. In moments when the world feels like it's closing in, injecting curiosity breaks the cycle. It interrupts the spiral. It hands the mind a different lens. This doesn't mean the situation isn't hard. It means the brain is now watching it differently. Instead of why is this happening to me, it becomes what is this trying to show me? Instead of I'm trapped, it becomes what happens if I stay present just a little longer? Curiosity softens shame. It disarms judgment. It gives permission to be human without needing to have all the answers. Suddenly, the breakdown becomes data. The mistake becomes a mystery to explore. The pain becomes a signal to decode. And the emotion, once feared, becomes something to study. Injecting curiosity isn't passive. It's defiant. It's choosing to look at the monster under the bed and take notes. Over time, this changes your relationship with discomfort, not because you control it, but because you outgrow the fear of not knowing. And the moment that happens, the mind stops shrinking in crisis and starts expanding in it. Identity sculpting. Identity sculpting is the psychological craft of becoming who you need to be by treating your identity not as fixed, but as clay. Most people think they have to change their habits first. They wait for evidence, wait for results, wait to feel like the kind of person who succeeds. But this technique flips the formula. Instead of waiting to feel different, you act different, consistently enough that the mind catches up. The brain is designed to reduce cognitive dissonance. When behavior contradicts belief, the brain either changes the action or rewrites the belief to match. Identity sculpting takes advantage of this glitch. You start acting like the version of yourself you respect, even if it feels fake, especially when it feels fake. That friction is the signal that the mold is being reshaped. Want to be disciplined? Start by behaving as if you already are. Wake up early, finish the hard thing. Let the actions chisel away the old self-perception. The mind will fight back at first. This isn't who I am, but that voice is outdated software. Every repeated action is a hammer strike against it, and eventually the shape changes. What makes identity sculpting powerful isn't motivation. It's consistency in the face of doubt. It's the willingness to walk like someone who doesn't quit, even when quitting feels easier. Because over time, the brain starts to reconcile the gap. If I'm acting like this, maybe I am this. It's not about faking it. It's about forming it over and over. Behavior before belief, movement before mindset. And before long, you're not pretending anymore. You've become the sculpture you once only imagined. Predictive focus. Anchoring predictive focus. Anchoring is the hidden art of deciding, before the chaos, what your mind will cling to when everything falls apart. Most people wait until they're overwhelmed to choose how to think. By then, it's too late. The storm has taken over. But predictive anchoring flips that script. It plants a mental stake in the ground before the winds come. It starts with this question: when I'm triggered, what truth will I return to? This isn't wishful thinking. It's a prepared focus, a mantra, a mental grip point. When stress hits, you don't scramble for clarity. You reach for what's already been rehearsed. I've been here before. Breathe first, speak second. I'm not my thoughts. I'm the one watching them. Whatever the phrase, whatever the truth, it becomes your anchor. And anchors don't move in storms. This technique rewires the panic circuit. Instead of being swept into survival mode, the brain receives a cue it already recognizes. The body may still react, but the mind knows what to hold. Athletes use it before competition. Soldiers use it before battle. Performers use it before stepping on stage. It's not confidence, it's preparation. The more often this anchor is mentally rehearsed, the more powerful it becomes. You train your nervous system to return to calm, not through logic, but through repetition. Over time, it becomes reflex. The moment fear strikes, you default to your anchor, not because the fear is gone, but because your identity is already spoken for. And in that moment, when everyone else loses themselves, you remember who you decided to be. That's not just focus, that's prophecy. That's mental gravity strong enough to hold you steady while the world shakes. Confidence borrowing. Confidence borrowing is the mental art of temporarily stepping into someone else's certainty so you can act before doubt has a chance to talk you out of it. It's the psychological equivalent of putting on armor that isn't yours, but fits just long enough to survive the battle. When your own confidence feels too shaky, this trick bypasses it completely. Instead of trying to build it from within, you borrow it from someone who already has it, real or imagined. Think of someone who radiates the kind of confidence you need, a mentor, a character, a version of yourself from your best day. Then ask, what would they do in this moment? The key isn't just asking, it's answering as if you were them. You adopt their posture, their inner tone, their decisiveness. The brain responds faster than you expect. It doesn't stop to fact check. It simply follows the cue. Confidence isn't a trait, it's a state, and states are transferable. When you borrow confidence, you're leveraging your brain's mirror system, the same one that makes us flinch when someone else gets hurt or yawn when they do. That system allows emotion to spread like wildfire, including self-belief. Most people wait to feel ready. This technique says, don't wait, borrow. Channel that energy like a psychic costume, and suddenly your voice doesn't shake as much. Your steps don't hesitate as long. You do the thing you were about to avoid, not because you've changed forever, but because, for one moment, you believe differently. And sometimes that's all it takes, one borrowed moment of courage, one action you couldn't otherwise take. And after that, you don't need to borrow anymore because you just became the person someone else could borrow from. Mental rehearsal override. Mental rehearsal override is the ability to take control of your mind's most powerful simulator, the one that's been hijacked by anxiety, regret, and worst-case scenarios, and rewrite the script. The brain rehearses all day. Conversations that haven't happened, arguments that never will, futures soaked in fear, past mistakes relived with perfect clarity. Most people don't realize they're rehearsing disaster, and the more it's rehearsed, the more real it feels. This trick flips the default. It takes the same neural machinery used to anticipate doom and points it at a different outcome. Not toxic positivity, not fantasy, but possibility. Real, grounded, tangible outcomes that shift the emotional weight of what's being practiced. Instead of imagining how it could all fall apart, you walk your brain through how it might actually go right. You picture your voice steady, your breath calm, your response clean, your presence unshaken, over and over, not once, not casually, but deliberately. This overrides the old loop, and the brain, unable to tell real from vividly imagined, begins to lay new tracks. Rehearsal is how confidence is built without evidence. It's mental muscle memory. The more you walk through success before it happens, the more familiar it becomes. The mind stops flinching. The fear loses sharpness. You enter the real moment with the sense that you've been here. Because in a way, you have. You trained for it in silence, not by chance, but by choice. And that choice, repeated daily, becomes a weapon, a quiet certainty, a calm in the storm that others mistake for natural poise. But it wasn't chance, it was override. Micro-momentum activation. Micro-momentum activation is the hidden lever behind unstoppable progress because it doesn't rely on motivation, discipline, or mood. It relies on something smaller, faster, and infinitely more powerful. Movement that's too tiny to fail. When the mountain feels too big to climb, this technique doesn't argue with the mountain. It finds the smallest possible step and takes it immediately. No planning, no overthinking, just movement. Now, the brain is wired to protect energy. That's why starting feels impossible. That's why resistance grows the longer you wait. But micro-momentum bypasses the gatekeeper. It doesn't say run 5 miles. It says put your shoes on. It doesn't scream finish the book. It whispers write one messy sentence. And something strange happens in that moment. Motion ignites, action begins, and the brain, sensing movement, adjusts its chemistry to match. Once even the smallest task is in motion, the mind begins to crave completion. Dopamine trickles in, not from achievement but from the mere act of beginning. You start to want to finish what you've started, not because you feel inspired, but because the gears are already turning. Micro-momentum hijacks the mental resistance loop and replaces it with a completion loop. People wait their whole lives for the perfect time to act. This technique doesn't care about perfect. It weaponizes now, because motion, even microscopic motion, creates energy, and energy feeds identity. With enough repetitions, the body learns something the mind forgot, that doing is easier than dreading. 1 inch forward rewires the story. 1 flicker of progress becomes proof that you're not frozen, you're moving, and once you're moving, even chaos can't hold you still. Dopamine delay practice. Dopamine delay practice is the subtle superpower of teaching the brain to wait, and by waiting, to win. In a world addicted to speed, this technique is rebellion. It breaks the cycle of instant gratification by retraining the reward system to crave discipline over indulgence. Most people don't realize how often they chase the dopamine hit. The scroll, the snack, the shortcut, the distraction. The mind learns to expect reward fast and breaks when it's delayed. But when dopamine is delayed on purpose, something incredible happens. The brain doesn't just suffer through the wait. It adapts. It starts to stretch. That anticipation becomes energy. That hunger becomes fuel. What was once impatience becomes power, because now the mind isn't led by craving, it's guided by choice. You start small. You want the treat? Wait 5 more minutes. You're about to check the message? Breathe first. Pause. Wait. When the desire surges, you delay, not forever, but long enough to show the brain who's boss, long enough to prove the craving won't kill you. The magic of this practice isn't in the denial, it's in the control. Every moment you resist the reflex, you reclaim a piece of yourself, and the longer you wait, the sweeter the reward, not just emotionally, but chemically. Dopamine hits harder when it's earned. Over time, the delay becomes a habit, a lifestyle, and the person who once needed everything now becomes the one who can wait, work, and win. In that delay, something grows that no instant pleasure can give, self-trust. And with that, the mind stops chasing and starts choosing. Micro-momentum activation. Micro-momentum activation is the hidden lever behind unstoppable progress because it doesn't rely on motivation, discipline, or mood. It relies on something smaller, faster, and infinitely more powerful. Movement that's too tiny to fail. When the mountain feels too big to climb, this technique doesn't argue with the mountain. It finds the smallest possible step and takes it immediately. No planning, no overthinking, just movement. Now, the brain is wired to protect energy. That's why starting feels impossible. That's why resistance grows the longer you wait. But micro-momentum bypasses the gatekeeper. It doesn't say, run 5 miles. It says, put your shoes on. It doesn't scream, finish the book. It whispers, write 1 messy sentence. And something strange happens in that moment. Motion ignites, action begins, and the brain, sensing movement, adjusts its chemistry to match. Once even the smallest task is in motion, the mind begins to crave completion. Dopamine trickles in, not from achievement, but from the mere act of beginning. You start to want to finish what you've started, not because you feel inspired, but because the gears are already turning. Micro-momentum hijacks the mental resistance loop and replaces it with a completion loop. People wait their whole lives for the perfect time to act. This technique doesn't care about perfect. It weaponizes now, because motion, even microscopic motion, creates energy, and energy feeds identity. With enough repetitions, the body learns something the mind forgot, that doing is easier than dreading. 1 inch forward rewires the story. 1 flicker of progress becomes proof that you're not frozen, you're moving, and once you're moving, even chaos can't hold you still. 4.0. You said, high-stakes imagination. ChatGPT said, high-stakes imagination. High-stakes imagination is the psychological power move of raising the stakes, not in real life, but in your mind. It's the opposite of playing it safe. Instead of visualizing success with ease, this technique imagines your goal as if the cost of failure is personal, urgent, and irreversible. It manufactures intensity. It turns ordinary dreams into life or death missions, and the brain responds by eliminating distractions and sharpening focus like a survival instinct has been activated. Most people imagine what they want in soft tones, winning the race, getting the promotion, writing the book. But soft images create soft urgency. High-stakes imagination changes that. It injects narrative into your goal. You imagine your child watching. You imagine someone you love depending on your outcome. You imagine that not showing up today isn't neutral. It costs something sacred. That imagined pressure transforms the task. The brain doesn't distinguish emotional fiction from reality. That's why stories make us cry, and adrenaline can spike from a nightmare. High-stakes imagination hacks that system. It gives the task teeth. It creates emotional consequences, ones so sharp that your fight or flight system kicks in on your behalf. This isn't stress. It's intentional intensity. It's treating your mission like someone's survival depends on it, even if no one's watching. Because when the mind senses high stakes, it stops bargaining with laziness. It stops entertaining comfort. It moves. Used sparingly, it's a weapon. Used regularly, it becomes a mindset. Not fear-driven, but purpose-driven. Not about drama, but about depth. Because when your imagination burns hot enough, you stop asking for motivation. You start acting like your life depends on it, even when no one knows why but you. Discomfort Calibration. Discomfort calibration is the practice of rewiring your relationship with pain, not by escaping it, but by gradually turning it into your compass. Most people flinch at discomfort, seeing it as a stop sign, but those who become mentally unbreakable learn to treat it as feedback, not failure. This technique doesn't demand you dive into suffering blindly. It teaches you to inch into the edge, get familiar with the burn, and make discomfort measurable. You start by identifying your threshold. Maybe it's the silence before speaking, the moment before saying no, the stretch before a cold shower, whatever feels just a little too much. That's your zone. Then you stay, not forever, just long enough to prove to your nervous system that it won't die from tension, that your limits are negotiable. Every day you raise the bar, 1 second longer in silence, 1 breath deeper into fear, 1 moment more inside the thing you'd normally escape. The body screams, but the mind observes. The flinch fades, and eventually, what once felt unbearable becomes baseline. The power here lies in precision. Discomfort becomes data. You stop seeing stress as danger and start seeing it as training. And because discomfort is no longer foreign, you stop being controlled by it. Over time, the calibration compounds. Cold becomes focus. Hunger becomes clarity. Awkwardness becomes power. The very sensations that made you shrink now signal growth. And in that rewired nervous system lives a rare kind of person, the one who doesn't just tolerate pressure, but uses it. Not all at once, but one calibrated threshold at a time. Hypercontext switching. Hypercontext switching is the mind's ability to rapidly shift gears between mental states, environments, and identities without dragging baggage from one into the next. It's not multitasking, it's mental segmentation at a superhuman level. It's the psychological equivalent of walking through multiple worlds in a single day and behaving as if each one is the only one that exists. And when mastered, it becomes a superpower for focus, emotional control, and adaptability. Most people carry context like a wet coat. Stress from work bleeds into dinner. A fight from the morning lingers into the evening. One failure pollutes the next attempt. Hypercontext switching breaks that loop. It creates sharp, deliberate borders between mental rooms. You are one person in the meeting, clear, commanding, strategic. You step out and you become someone else, playful, relaxed, or inward, not fake. Focus. The brain loves context. It ties emotions to environments. That's why a certain room can trigger stress, or a scent can make grief feel fresh again. But those triggers can be reversed. With conscious practice, context becomes your tool, not your trap. A song, a breath pattern, a phrase, these become the switches, the transitions, the rituals between selves. Hypercontext switching makes sure one failure doesn't bleed into the next attempt. It ensures that a moment of anger doesn't poison a whole day. It teaches your nervous system to respond only to this environment, this challenge, this identity. When used with precision, it feels like emotional teleportation. Chaos doesn't cling, worry doesn't follow. Each scene gets the version of you it needs, untouched by the last, unburdened by the next. That's not performance, that's precision living. Reaction distance expansion. Reaction distance expansion is the mental art of stretching the space between stimulus and response, just enough to take back control from your impulses. It's the split-second breath that changes everything. the pause between what happens to you and what happens through you. In that space lies power, clarity, and the version of yourself who doesn't flinch, lash out, or spiral. Most people live in reflex. Someone disrespects them, they snap. Plans go wrong, they panic. A single notification ruins their entire morning. There's no distance between what hits and what fires back. Reaction becomes identity, and that's where life gets hijacked. But when you expand that invisible space, when you interrupt the default response even by half a second, you buy freedom. You feel the anger rise, but you don't speak it yet. You hear the insult, but you don't bite. You feel the fear, but you breathe instead of bolt. That distance is where choice returns. This isn't repression, it's redirection. You're not denying emotion, you're honoring it by choosing how to express it. The brain's amygdala wants to rush, it wants to protect. But when you expand the reaction distance, you give the prefrontal cortex time to engage, to process, evaluate, and decide. And decision is where transformation begins. Over time, that pause becomes a habit. You stop being emotionally hijacked by every disruption. You become slower to anger, quicker to recover, harder to manipulate. People around you start reacting to your calm instead of you reacting to their chaos. Reaction distance expansion doesn't make you emotionless, it makes you unshakable because you stop living at the mercy of the moment and start mastering it instead. Inner narrator rewriting. Inner narrator rewriting is the most transformative mental trick most people never attempt. Changing not what happens, but the voice that tells the story. Every thought, every memory, every belief is filtered through an inner voice. And for most, that voice is brutal. It doubts, mocks, second guesses, catastrophizes. It sounds like a parent, a bully, a ghost from childhood. And because it's familiar, it's trusted. But familiarity is not truth. This technique begins with one realization. That voice is not you. It's been programmed, and if it was installed, it can be rewritten. Not silenced, not fought, rewritten. You start by listening. Carefully. What does your narrator say when you mess up? When you walk into a room? When you look in the mirror? What tone does it use? Whose voice does it sound like? Then you begin the rewrite. You choose a new voice, maybe calmer, maybe wiser. Maybe it sounds like someone who loves you. Every time the old script plays, you'll fail. They're judging you, you're not enough. You interrupt. You don't argue, you replace. You're learning. They're just people. You're already worthy. Not affirmations screamed at the void, but sentences whispered with authority. Over time, the brain adjusts, the neural pathways rewire, the voice softens, the story shifts, and with it, your identity transforms, because the inner narrator doesn't just describe life, it creates it. A cruel narrator builds a cage, a kind one builds courage. You don't need new thoughts, you need a new storyteller, one who sees you not as broken, but becoming. Mental cold exposure. Mental cold exposure is the internal version of plunging your mind into discomfort on purpose until what once froze you becomes familiar terrain. Just like physical cold exposure trains the body to tolerate shock, this technique trains the mind to withstand emotional extremes. Rejection, embarrassment, uncertainty, loneliness. The moments that send people spiraling become your personal gym. This isn't masochism, it's mastery. It starts with microdoses. You voluntarily place your mind in a situation that chills your ego. Maybe you speak up when silence feels safer. Maybe you face a fear you've rehearsed avoiding. Maybe you sit still in boredom without reaching for a screen. The key is to let the discomfort rise and stay. You don't fight it. You don't fix it. You let it wash over you again and again until it loses its grip. The brain learns fast. When you expose it to the thing it dreads and nothing breaks, the fear loses its fangs. The freezing moments become tolerable, then ordinary, then irrelevant. Mental cold becomes mental calm. Over time, this exposure expands your emotional range. The things that once triggered avoidance now become opportunities. You enter hard conversations with breath instead of armor. You face silence without craving noise. You walk into the unknown without begging for guarantees. And that's when you realize resilience isn't built by comfort. It's carved out in the cold. The person who can sit still in mental frost without running, numbing, or retreating, that's the person who walks into life's storms without flinching, not because they're fearless, but because they've trained with the cold and made it a friend. Controlled paranoia filter. Controlled paranoia filter is the strategic use of suspicion, not to become fearful, but to become fiercely aware. It's the mindset of questioning what's being sold, shown, or said, not from insecurity, but from intelligent vigilance. Most people associate paranoia with instability, but when harnessed deliberately, paranoia becomes precision. It sharpens your perception, tunes your instincts, and protects you from manipulation dressed as kindness, loyalty, or truth. In a world full of persuasion, algorithms, and curated realities, blind trust is a liability. Controlled paranoia doesn't mean distrusting everyone. It means testing the frame. When someone compliments you, you ask, what do they stand to gain? When a situation feels too easy, you ask, what's not being shown? This doesn't paralyze action. It calibrates it. You don't freeze, you just scan. Controlled paranoia rewires the brain to detect false signals. It's like installing a mental firewall, one that filters for hidden agendas, emotional bait, and power plays wrapped in flattery. And the more you practice, the less surprised you are when people reveal themselves, because you weren't blinded by appearances. You were watching for patterns. This filter makes you a more grounded leader, a harder target, and a better decision maker. It allows you to enter situations with your eyes open, not wide shut. You spot the manipulation before it wraps around you. You sense the trap before it closes. And the beauty of it, you can still be kind, still be generous, still be open, but your kindness isn't naive. Your openness isn't exploitable, because behind your calm exterior is a mind that sees 3 moves ahead, scans for the unseen, and never hands over trust without a silent question first. Confidence through confession. Confidence through confession is the paradoxical mental trick that turns vulnerability into power. It works by doing what the ego fears most, exposing the truth before anyone else can use it against you. While most people try to hide their flaws to appear strong, this technique flips the entire strategy. Reveal them first, and they lose their bite. Confession doesn't mean oversharing, it means ownership. When you say, I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm learning, you take control of the narrative. When you admit, yes, I failed, but I'm still here, you become untouchable, because nothing destroys shame like sunlight, and nothing terrifies fear more than a person who no longer hides. This trick disarms judgment before it arrives. If you name your weakness out loud, it can't be weaponized. The mind, once defensive, becomes grounded. The body, once tense, starts to breathe again, and the room, the people, the pressure, the expectation starts to lean in, because realness in a world full of mass magnetizes. It's not about lowering the bar, it's about raising the truth. People trust those who are self-aware. People follow those who don't flinch at their own imperfections. And most importantly, you begin to trust yourself, not because you're flawless, but because your flaws are no longer secrets. The confidence that comes from confession is different. It's quieter, stronger. It's not the roar of ego. It's the calm of someone who has nothing left to prove. And that calm, that unshakable center, only appears after the armor comes off. When you stop trying to be perfect and start being honest, you don't lose power. You become it. Time scarcity simulation. Time scarcity simulation is the radical mental trick of pretending your time is about to run out, not someday, but today. It's the deliberate illusion that the clock is vanishing, the deadline is now, and the luxury of later no longer exists. Not to panic yourself, but to finally act like your life matters. When used correctly, this simulation sets fire to procrastination, melts indecision, and burns away every excuse that comfort ever whispered. Most people treat time like it's infinite. They scroll, they stall, they say tomorrow like they own it. But what if you didn't? What if you had 1 week left to write the book, make the call, say the thing that needs saying? Time scarcity simulation forces the mind into urgency by bending reality. It doesn't wait for crisis to wake you. It creates it internally. It simulates finality. And in that simulation, you finally see clearly. All the things that didn't matter fall away. All the noise gets quiet. What's real sharpens. What's essential glows. Because when time feels scarce, priorities reorder themselves without negotiation. You don't need more clarity. You need less illusion. This mental trick collapses your lazy relationship with the clock. It trains you to live like time isn't a guarantee, because it's not. The brain, when placed under simulated time pressure, doesn't collapse. It sharpens, it prioritizes, it moves, and the more you simulate scarcity, the more you begin to act urgently by default. You stop waiting for perfect. You stop pretending you have time to waste, because in your mind, the sand is already falling. And that illusion, it might just save the real minutes that matter. Inner critic name game. The inner critic name game is a deceptively playful but profoundly powerful mental trick for defanging the harshest voice in your head. Everyone has an inner critic, that voice that says, "You're not good enough. They're all judging you. Why even try?" Most people let it run wild, mistaking it for truth. But here's the secret. That voice is not you. And the moment you name it, you take away its power. The trick begins by catching the critic mid-sentence. You pause, you listen, then you give it a name. Not your name, not a noble name, something a little ridiculous. Nervous Nancy, Judgy Greg, Doom Donna, Carl, whatever makes you smirk, whatever reminds you. This isn't your soul speaking, it's a pattern. By naming the voice, you create separation, a boundary, a space between the observer and the noise. You're no longer inside the criticism, you're witnessing it. That's when control returns. You can talk back. "Thanks, Carl, but we're not doing that today." "Appreciate the drama, Donna, but I've got things to build." This naming trick short-circuits shame. It dissolves over-identification. It allows you to feel the fear, the doubt, the insecurity, but not collapse under it. Because now, it's not a divine command. It's just Carl having a tantrum in your head. Over time, this game rewires self-talk. The critic speaks less. The voice of calm grows louder. And eventually, you realize the most important truth of all. The critic may live in your head, but it doesn't get to drive. Not anymore, not since you gave it a name and stopped mistaking it for you. Reverse gratitude technique. The reverse gratitude technique is a mind-altering shift in perspective that doesn't just remind you what to be grateful for, it shows you what your life would feel like without it. It flips the script of traditional gratitude. Instead of listing blessings, it erases them mentally, intentionally, and forces the heart to feel the vacuum they would leave behind. And in that emptiness, appreciation doesn't just surface, it erupts. Most people treat gratitude like homework, a few things scribbled in a journal, a polite thank you to the universe. But this technique cuts deeper. It doesn't ask what you love, it asks what would break you if it vanished. What part of your day would gut you if it never returned? What face, what freedom, what quiet moment would leave a hole if it disappeared tonight? By imagining life stripped of its anchors, your nervous system wakes up. Suddenly, that cup of coffee becomes sacred. That smile from someone you almost ignore becomes gold. That body you complain about becomes a miracle. This isn't about fear. It's about resensitizing the soul. Gratitude through absence. And the more often you reverse it, the sharper your awareness becomes. Mundane moments regain their weight. Ordinary things start glowing again because the mind now knows what their absence feels like. The simulation becomes emotional reality, and that's where the shift lives. You don't just become grateful, you become protective of what you once took for granted. You start treating people and moments like they're on loan from something fragile, because deep down, you remember everything could vanish, and for a moment, you felt that, and it changed the way you breathe. Mirror neuron triggering. Mirror neuron triggering is the silent psychological trick that lets you influence emotion, behavior, and trust without saying a single word. At the heart of this technique is a part of the brain designed for connection. Mirror neurons are cells that fire both when we act and when we see someone else act. They're the reason yawns are contagious, smiles spread like wildfire, and tension in a room feels physically heavy. The brain is wired to sync. It wants to match what it sees. Mirror neuron triggering uses this hard wiring to shift the emotional temperature of any space by being what you want others to become. If you want calm, be calm. If you want trust, embody trust. Not performatively, not manipulatively, but with presence that radiates. The trick lies in consistency. You slow your breath. You relax your shoulders. You hold soft eye contact. You listen, not with your ears alone, but with your nervous system. Others begin to mirror your energy without knowing why. Tension dissolves, defenses lower, you become the tuning fork. This doesn't just work in peace, it works in conflict. When someone is angry or anxious, your calm becomes contagious. When someone is guarded, your openness disarms them. It bypasses logic and speaks straight to the body. Leaders use this to establish authority without force. Therapists use it to build safety without words. Charismatic people don't just talk, they regulate the room by example. The truth is, the world is full of nervous systems looking for a rhythm to follow. Mirror neuron triggering lets yours become the rhythm, quietly, powerfully, without ever needing to raise your voice. Second brain consult. Second brain consult is the internal technique of stepping outside your own perspective and consulting the calm, wise version of yourself who doesn't panic, doesn't chase, and never reacts on impulse. It's the invisible meeting inside your head where the current you, emotional, rushed, clouded, sits down with the version of you that sees the bigger picture, the one that already knows what matters, what doesn't, and what your future self will regret. Most people live at the mercy of their first brain, the reactive one. It jumps, it fears, it spins, but the second brain is always there, just quieter. It's not a mystical force. It's the part of you that writes the apology letter after the explosion, the part that knew you were betraying yourself when you said yes to what you didn't want, the part that whispers clarity after the chaos has calmed. This technique is about accessing that clarity before the damage. You pause, you close your eyes, and you ask, what would the wisest version of me do right now? Not the most liked version, not the fastest, the wisest, the one who's lived through the fallout, seen the consequences, and doesn't need to prove anything anymore. And the answer comes, not always loud, but always clean. It feels steady, not reactive. It doesn't rush, it knows. And when you learn to consult that voice, decisions become quieter, emotions settle. You stop seeking validation because that second brain doesn't play that game. It's always been there, the version of you that already figured this out. You just have to make time to sit with them, ask the right question, and listen like your peace depends on it, because most of the time, it does. Ego suspension drill. Ego suspension drill is the radical mental practice of stepping out of your identity completely, so you can make decisions without pride, fear, or the need to protect an image. It's the act of mentally removing your name, your story, your title, even your face, and asking, if I were no one, what would I do right now? And in that silence, truth shows up. Because only when the ego steps aside can you hear the answer that isn't trying to win, impress, or survive. Most suffering doesn't come from reality. It comes from protecting who we think we are. We don't want to look weak, so we don't ask for help. We don't want to fail, so we never try. We don't want to be judged, so we stay stuck in roles that are slowly killing us. But the ego suspension drill removes the costume. It turns the mind into a clean room where clarity isn't filtered through insecurity. You do this by pausing before key decisions or reactions. You mentally strip away everything that connects you to outcome, your resume, your reputation, your followers, your story. You are no longer the achiever, the underdog, the hero, the victim. You are simply consciousness, seeing the moment for what it is, not what it says about you. This disconnection creates freedom. You can walk away without shame. You can speak hard truths without ego. You can lose without feeling like you are lost, because you stopped filtering your actions through a fragile identity and started choosing from something deeper. The longer you practice this, the lighter life feels. You don't react to protect a mask. You respond from stillness. And in a world addicted to performance, that makes you untouchable, not above anyone, just finally, beautifully unbound. Cognitive decoupling. Cognitive decoupling is the mental superpower of separating what you think from what you believe, even if only for a moment. It's the ability to hold a thought in your mind without swallowing it whole, to say, this might not be true, while still feeling its emotional weight. Most people never question the first thoughts that appear. The mind whispers, you're failing, and they agree. It flashes, they hate you, and they react. The thought appears and it becomes law, but cognitive decoupling breaks that chain. It creates space, distance, a sacred pause between the stimulus and the self. The thought still arises, but now you observe it, you dissect it, you ask, what if this is just noise? And just like that, the spell breaks. This technique isn't about positive thinking, it's about neutral witnessing. It doesn't require replacing negative thoughts with happy ones. It just means you stop assuming every mental notification deserves a response. You stop merging with your mind and start managing it. The trick is to treat every thought like a visitor, not a ruler. It walks into the room, says its piece, and you decide if it gets to stay. Over time, the brain learns. Not every thought is urgent, important, or real. You become harder to trigger, harder to manipulate. Cognitive decoupling gives you what most people lose in panic: choice. And in that choice, you reclaim something rare: sovereignty over your own mind. The thoughts still come, but now they answer to you, not the other way around. Voluntary vulnerability initiation. Voluntary vulnerability. Initiation is the deliberate act of revealing your weakness before the world demands it, because power isn't in being untouchable, it's in being unashamed. Most people wait until life cracks them open before they admit they're scared, confused, unsure. This technique flips the script. You go first, you open the door, you initiate the fall, and in doing so, you stop fearing it. It's not about emotional dumping, it's about strategic self-exposure. You say, I'm nervous to say this, or this might sound strange, but here's what's real for me. That one sentence dissolves distance. It lowers defenses, yours and theirs. It shows people you're not performing strength, you're owning your humanity. What makes this technique superhuman is its timing. It's not used when you're broken. It's used when you're strong enough to choose it, when your hands aren't trembling but you let them be seen anyway. That kind of openness disarms manipulation, creates authentic bonds, and signals immense inner security. Voluntary vulnerability makes you unshakable because there's nothing left to hide, no mask to maintain, no fear of being exposed because you already exposed yourself. And the paradox? That's what makes people trust you, follow you, feel you. in negotiation, in leadership, in love. This is the secret weapon. The person who risks being real first controls the rhythm. And in that rhythm, something rare happens. The game of facades ends, the connection deepens, and suddenly you're not performing power, you are it, not despite your openness, but because of it. Mental pattern interruption. Mental pattern interruption is the psychological jolt that stops your brain mid-spiral, shattering autopilot loops of fear, self-sabotage, overthinking, and emotional reactivity. It's the moment you slam the brakes on a runaway thought before it drags you somewhere darker, and in that single instant, your whole trajectory changes, not because you fixed the problem, but because you interrupted the trance. Most people don't think, they rethink. The same fears, the same regrets, the same narratives. Their brain isn't a thinker, it's a repeater, and every time that loop runs, it gets faster, louder, harder to escape. Pattern interruption is the only way out. You don't reason with the spiral, you shock it, you override it with something unexpected, even absurd. You can yell, you can stand up suddenly, you can switch environments, drop to the floor, clap your hands, count backwards by sevens, anything that sends a signal, we're not going down that road today. The brain snaps out of autopilot, like a record scratch in the middle of a sad song. Suddenly, there's space. That space is everything. It's where awareness reboots. It's where emotion softens. It's where you remember, you are not your thoughts. Thoughts. You are the one who hears them. And in that split second of interruption, you get to decide whether to return to the pattern or rewrite it. It doesn't take hours of therapy or years of healing to reclaim a moment. Sometimes it takes one sharp interruption, one refusal to let the brain walk the same tired path. Because that one disruption, it's not the fix, it's the doorway. And every time you walk through it, you come back to yourself. Fear familiarization ritual. Fear familiarization ritual is the practice of turning fear into a familiar face, so it stops screaming every time it shows up. Most people treat fear like a fire alarm, loud, sudden, dangerous. Their reflex is to run, fix, numb, or fight. But this trick does the opposite. It invites fear in, sits it down, looks it in the eye, over and over, until the panic loses its edge, not because it disappears, but because it becomes known. The ritual begins by identifying one fear, just one, not your biggest, but your most persistent, the one that shows up before you speak, try, leave, begin. Then every day you meet it, not in chaos, but in quiet. You write about it, speak it aloud, rehearse it like a script. I'm afraid of being judged. I'm afraid they'll leave. I'm afraid of failing publicly. And then you go deeper. What does it feel like in the body? Where does it sit? What story does it tell? This isn't about logic. Fear doesn't respond to logic. It responds to exposure. The more often you bring it into the light, the less power it has in the dark. The brain stops flinching. The body stops bracing. You recognize the thought as old, familiar, survivable. Over time, fear becomes less of an enemy and more of a signal, a whisper that you're about to do something real, something that matters. And instead of shrinking, you listen, nod, and move forward anyway, not because fear left, but because now it speaks in a voice you recognize, and you're no longer afraid of being afraid. Daily self-obituary. Daily self-obituary is the rawest mental drill you'll ever perform. It asks you to imagine every single day that you've just died. No fanfare, no warning, just gone. And from that imagined death, you write what they'll say about you, not what you wish they'd say, what they'd really say, the truth behind your name, the impact you left, the messes you never cleaned, the love you never voiced, the potential you never touched. This isn't a feel-good gratitude practice. This is ego surgery. It exposes the brutal gap between who you pretend to be and who you actually are. It drags out the uncomfortable questions. Would anyone feel different because you existed? Did you fight for anything besides comfort? Did you live or just wait around to feel ready? The brain can't ignore death when it's placed this close. Suddenly, your phone feels less important. Your envy, laughable. That grudge, absurd. Because when you imagine your story ending tonight, the noise starts falling away. And what's left? The love you gave, the courage you showed, the truth you told, starts burning with a new kind of urgency. Writing your self-obituary daily isn't morbid. It's clarifying. It reminds you that you're not promised later. It forces alignment, not someday, but today. You stop postponing the hard things. You stop chasing hollow wins. You start becoming the kind of person who earns the words they want carved into memory. And maybe, just maybe, the life you start living to deserve a better obituary becomes the life you were always meant to die proud of. Emotional forecast. Correction. Emotional forecast correction is the quiet skill of challenging your brain's worst predictions before they shape your reality. Most people live in reaction to storms that haven't even arrived, terrified of outcomes their nervous system has already decided will go wrong. This trick doesn't silence emotion. It interrogates the forecast. It hears the inner voice that says, "You're gonna mess this up," and asks, "Based on what?" The brain is a prediction machine. It scans for patterns, creates a story, and calls it truth. If the past felt painful, it assumes the future will be too. It paints anxiety as prophecy, shame as memory, regret as evidence. And without realizing it, people start to obey a future that doesn't even exist. But emotional forecast correction interrupts the loop. You catch the feeling before it drives the day. You question the certainty behind the fear. You say, "Is this an emotional echo, or is it actually happening?" You separate the forecast from the facts. This technique doesn't demand optimism. It demands accuracy. The panic may still be there. The sadness may still speak, but you no longer take their predictions at face value. You don't treat emotion as destiny. You treat it as data. And when the data is distorted, you rewrite the chart. Over time, the mind begins to hesitate before declaring disaster. It checks itself. It softens. And eventually, your emotional weather system stops swinging wildly because you stopped believing every cloud meant a storm. The forecast becomes quieter, and the day becomes yours again, not the ghost of yesterday's pain wearing tomorrow's face. Impulse labeling. Impulse labeling is the act of catching a wild, emotional urge in real time and giving it a name before it controls you. It sounds simple, but in practice, it's a razor-sharp technique that turns chaos into clarity. Instead of blindly obeying a craving, a reaction, or a sudden need to run, yell, quit, scroll, lash out, or numb, you name it. Not with judgment, but with honesty. This is fear. This is escape. This is ego. This is self-sabotage dressed as excitement. The brain is impulsive by design. It wants comfort now, resolution now, pleasure now, and left unchecked, it will drag you from one emotional cliff to another without explanation. Impulse labeling breaks that chain. It doesn't stop the impulse, it observes it. And in that observation, the compulsion weakens. The spotlight shrinks it. Because once you name the urge, it can't hide in the body anymore. It can't disguise itself as logic. "I need to leave this relationship" becomes "I want to escape discomfort." "I need to check my phone" becomes "I want to avoid sitting with myself." Labeling pulls the mask off, and the second the mask drops, choice returns. This technique doesn't require meditation or a quiet room. It requires presence in the mess. In the split second before the behavior takes over, ask, "What is this impulse trying to protect me from?" Then say it out loud or in your head. That's it. The spell breaks, the loop weakens, and you become someone who acts with awareness, not addiction. Impulse labeling won't erase your urges, but it makes them visible, and once seen, They can no longer lead you blindly. You're not a puppet anymore. You're the narrator, and the script just got rewritten. Failure porn detox. Failure porn detox is the radical decision to stop romanticizing collapse as a badge of honor and to stop feeding on stories that equate suffering with value. In a world obsessed with rock bottoms and dramatic comebacks, people unconsciously start to crave destruction just to feel worthy of a rebuild. This trick pulls you out of that cycle by detoxing your nervous system from the addictive highs of failure glorification. Social media is full of tear-streaked success stories. I lost everything, then I rose. And while resilience is real, the overexposure to pain narratives distorts your sense of what growth actually looks like. You start thinking you're not growing unless you're breaking. You wait for things to go wrong just to justify transformation. You sabotage peace because chaos feels more productive. Failure porn detox begins with awareness. You stop consuming stories that equate suffering with status. You notice the inner voice that whispers, "You haven't earned it yet. You haven't hurt enough." And then you call it what it is: addiction to drama disguised as inspiration. You retrain your mind to find depth in stability, beauty in consistency, transformation without collapse. You learn to grow without burning it all down. You celebrate small wins without needing a crisis to justify them. This detox is not about denying failure. It's about refusing to fetishize it. When the mind stops associating worth with wounds, you start healing without spectacle. You stop chasing breakdowns just to feel alive. And that's when real power begins, not when you fall and rise, but when you build without needing to bleed first. Thought speed regulation. Thought speed regulation is the inner mechanism that separates a scattered mind from a sovereign one. It's the ability to notice how fast your thoughts are moving and consciously slow them down before they spiral into anxiety, panic, or paralysis. Because most people don't suffer from overthinking. They suffer from overspeed thinking, a mind racing without brakes, a mental engine revving without direction. You know the feeling. One worry turns into 10, 10 become 100, and suddenly you're reacting to situations that haven't even happened. Your nervous system is flooded, not because life is too intense, but because thought is moving faster than your body can process. Thought speed regulation steps in as a mental handbrake. It doesn't stop the thoughts. It paces them. It starts with awareness. You pause. You ask, how fast am I thinking right now? Then you deliberately shift into slower processing. Speak out loud. Write by hand. Walk while thinking. Breathe slower than your thoughts. These are not distractions. They are regulators. They sync your physiology to your cognition, pulling your awareness back from the edge. When your thoughts outpace your presence, you become reactive. When your presence controls the tempo, you become responsive. This technique teaches your brain that it doesn't need to solve everything right now. That slowness isn't weakness, it's strategy. And with enough practice, something changes. Your baseline tempo lowers, your thoughts stop stampeding, and you no longer get pulled into mental avalanches just because they started moving fast. Thought speed regulation won't make you smarter. It makes you still enough to use your intelligence wisely. And that's what separates those who burn out from those who build empires, one calm thought at a time. Ultra-presence focusing. Ultra-presence focusing is the rare ability to anchor your entire awareness into one exact moment, so fully, so fiercely, that time bends around you. Most people spend their lives leaking attention, half here, half in memory, half in what if. They listen while worrying. They act while second-guessing. They speak while rehearsing the reply. Ultra-presence is what happens when all the halves collapse and you show up whole. This isn't ordinary mindfulness. This is war-level focus. It's not just paying attention. It's eliminating everything else. You breathe, you slow your eyes, you zoom in on what's right in front of you, the warmth of the cup, the tension in your hands, the tone in someone's voice, and suddenly the moment expands. The room sharpens, the noise quiets, your nervous system stops scanning for danger and starts belonging. Ultra presence isn't just peaceful, it's lethal. In this state, you move cleaner, think faster, speak with weight. You hear what others miss. You catch the flicker in someone's eye before they speak. You sense tension before it explodes. You become impossibly here while the rest of the world drifts in delay. This kind of presence takes practice. You train it by choosing one task and treating it like the whole world, washing a dish like it's a meditation, listening like nothing else exists, standing in silence without reaching for a screen. The brain starts to rewire, dopamine calms, cortisol drops, and with every session, you sharpen until presence stops being a practice and becomes your default. And in a distracted world, that makes you dangerous, because nothing is more powerful than a person who can fully be where they are, on purpose. Reality doubt drill. Reality doubt drill is the psychological act of pulling the rug out from under your certainty on purpose. It's the controlled demolition of your assumptions, your narratives, your default truths. Because most people don't see reality. They see a version of it built from emotion, memory, bias, and trauma. The reality doubt drill asks, what if I'm wrong? What if this isn't what I think it is? And in that moment of self-inquiry, the walls bend, light gets in, and illusion starts to crack. You think they hate you. Are you sure? You think you're failing. According to what metric? You think you're unlovable. Based on what evidence? This technique doesn't aim to make you right. It aims to make you free. Free from the stories you didn't even realize were optional. Free from the emotional filters that shape every reaction, every judgment, every limiting belief. The drill is simple, but not easy. When a thought hits hard, pause. Ask, what else could this mean? What's another lens? Whose voice am I hearing in this thought? The brain, when challenged, doesn't collapse. It expands. And when you doubt reality deliberately, you stop being a prisoner of your own mind. This isn't about paranoia. It's about precision. The ability to walk around your thoughts, poke holes in them, and realize they are not sacred. They are sketches, drafts, rehearsals, not the truth. And the more you run the drill, the more flexible your mind becomes, less reactive, more curious, because certainty is armor, but doubt is a scalpel. And sometimes the only way to see clearly is to question everything, especially the things you've never questioned before. Outcome indifference, outcome indifference conditioning is the mental edge that turns desire into power, not desperation. Most people chase goals with clenched fists, white-knuckling their way through life. They believe they need the result to be okay, that without the win, they're not enough. But that neediness leaks. It taints decision-making. It radiates insecurity. Outcome indifference breaks that addiction, not by giving up the goal, but by detaching from the outcome. The trick is subtle but brutal. You still want it, the job, the love, the win, but you train yourself to not need it to feel whole. You condition the mind to act boldly, knowing it might not work, and doing it anyway. Not because you're careless, but because your identity isn't on the line. It starts with micro decisions. You speak your truth knowing it might cost you approval. You make the move knowing it might not land. You apply, pitch, risk, while whispering, I don't need this to validate me. And then you walk away clean. No chasing, no replaying, no begging for the outcome to like you back. This indifference isn't apathy. It's freedom. It's what lets you be bold without being brittle. It makes you magnetic because people can sense when your self-worth doesn't rise and fall with their response. Over time, the conditioning takes hold. The outcomes still matter, but they don't own you. Wins are celebrated. Losses are studied. Neither defines you. And in that space, you move like someone who already has what they need. Clarity, calm, and the kind of confidence that isn't waiting on results. It creates them. Silent suffering translation. Silent suffering translation is the rare mental skill of decoding the pain that never speaks, turning numbness, burnout, or unexplained heaviness into a message you can finally understand. It's not about reacting to breakdowns. It's about listening to the quiet ache beneath your normal, the weight that's always there but never loud enough to scream, the fatigue that doesn't go away with sleep, the hollow that lives beneath your smile. Most people wait until pain becomes unbearable before they give it language, but silent suffering rarely explodes. It erodes. It makes you slower to laugh, quicker to snap, less available to joy, and because it doesn't come with visible wounds, it's easy to dismiss, easy to say, "I'm just tired," easy to say, "I'm fine," but your body knows, your decisions know, your dreams feel it gasping underneath the surface. Translation is the act of sitting with that silence and asking, "What are you trying to tell me?" It's the radical move of giving your numbness a pen. It might write, "I'm exhausted from pretending. I miss who I used to be. I don't feel safe. I'm grieving something no one sees." These aren't answers. They're openings. Openings to take yourself seriously before your collapse does it for you. Silent suffering translation doesn't mean fixing everything today. It means no longer ghosting your own pain. It means becoming fluent in the language of your own stillness. And the more you listen, the less your suffering needs to scream. Because finally, someone is listening, someone is naming it, and that someone is you. Thought timeout. Thought timeout is the mental pause button most people never use because they don't realize they can. It's the ability to temporarily suspend a thought before it spirals, expands, or sinks its claws into your nervous system. The mind generates non-stop commentary. You're behind. They're judging you. This will never work. And most people obey. But this technique gives you a hidden option. Not now. Thought timeout isn't suppression. It's containment. You don't deny the thought. You don't argue with it. You simply tell it. You don't get my energy right now. You recognize it, name it, and gently place it in a box for later, a mental container, a deferred tab, like telling a screaming child in your brain, "I hear you, but we'll talk when I'm calm." The practice starts with awareness. When you notice the thought rising, panic, guilt, resentment, you stop, you take a breath, you label it. That's the doom loop. That's my fear voice. Then you say, pause. You give yourself permission to return to the thought when you choose, not when it chooses you. This tiny act rewires control because most people think they must follow every mental thread immediately. But thought timeout teaches the opposite. Not every thought is urgent, true, or worth your presence right now. Over time, this becomes instinct. The mind still throws noise, but you don't chase it. You prioritize peace over processing. And strangely, most of those thoughts, when you come back to them, they're gone, or weaker, or laughable, because when you don't feed a thought with reaction, it starves, and in that quiet, you return to the center. Internal locus lock. Internal locus lock is the mental override that shifts your center of control back to where it belongs, inside you. It's the psychological equivalent of bolting the doors against blame, victimhood, and external validation. It trains your brain to stop outsourcing power to luck, to people, to circumstance, and start asking the only question that changes anything. What can I control right now? Most people live with a leaking center. Their emotions rise and fall based on how others behave. Their confidence hinges on praise. Their self-worth depends on outcomes. This creates emotional volatility. Life becomes a game of external weather. But internal locus lock reclaims that weather. It says, no one gets to be the reason I fall apart today. Not traffic, not silence, not rejection, not even failure. The technique is simple. When life throws chaos at you, you pause. You repeat, this happened. Now, what's mine? Maybe what's yours is how you interpret it. Maybe it's how you show up next. Maybe it's just your breath in the next 10 seconds. It doesn't matter how small, what matters is that it's yours. The more you lock your focus to your internal domain, the more unshakable you become. Criticism loses its sting, praise loses its addiction, chaos loses its leverage, because you're not here to control the storm, you're here to control your anchor. And when that lock is solid, when your identity, decisions, and peace are anchored inside, you stop being manipulated by the world. You witness it, you respond to it, but you don't hand it the keys. The lock holds, and with it, so do you. Mind distance walk. Mind distance walk is the practice of physically moving your body to create emotional space inside your brain. It sounds simple, too simple, but it's one of the most reliable tricks for untangling thoughts that feel too loud, too close, too heavy. When the mind loops, panics, replays, or overanalyzes, the instinct is to sit still and fix it from inside. But this technique says the opposite. Get up, get out, and let your feet do what your thoughts can't. There's something primal about walking without a destination. No phone, no music, just footsteps and breath. As the body moves, the mind begins to loosen its grip. Ideas shift from tangled to organized. Emotions move from stuck to fluid. Perspective opens, not because the problem got solved, but because the walls closed in and you walked them wider. Thoughts that feel enormous inside a room shrink under sky. Loops that feel endless behind a screen unravel beside trees, wind, gravel. There's neuroscience here, bilateral stimulation, rhythmic movement, but the power goes beyond science. It's the ancient intelligence of motion. During the walk, don't chase the thought. Let it follow you. Notice it, but don't invite it to speak. Just walk. Just breathe. Let silence be the filter. Eventually, something cracks open. Clarity appears, not as a lightning strike, but as a quiet knowing. This feeling will pass, and I'm not trapped in it. That's the gift of distance. You didn't solve the storm, you walked around it. And in doing so, you remembered that no thought owns the world unless you stop moving. Self-talk tonal shift. Self-talk tonal shift is the subtle, almost hypnotic art of changing not what you say to yourself, but how you say it, transforming inner criticism into quiet strength simply by shifting the voice's tone. Most people barely notice their inner dialogue, but the tone carries more emotional weight than the words themselves. A harsh, sarcastic tone tears down. A calm, gentle tone builds up. This trick rewires your internal coach by changing the emotional music behind your thoughts. Imagine hearing your inner voice as a relentless drill sergeant, barking demands and insults. It creates tension, fear, and self-doubt. Now imagine the same words spoken by a wise mentor, soft, steady, patient. The meaning doesn't change, but the feeling does. The brain relaxes, the nervous system calms, and resistance melts away. The tonal shift works because emotions aren't just about content, they're about delivery. Your brain responds to the emotional cues in your self-talk as if it's coming from another person you trust, or don't. By deliberately softening your internal tone, you invite compassion where there was judgment, patience where there was impatience. Practicing tonal shift means catching yourself mid-thought and replaying the phrase with a new voice, slower, kinder, firmer. It takes effort at first, but the brain begins to associate the new tone with safety and encouragement. Over time, this rewiring reduces anxiety, boosts confidence, and creates an internal environment where growth feels possible, not punishing. In this way, the self-talk tonal shift doesn't change what you face, it changes how you face it, and that subtle transformation is the doorway from self-criticism to self-mastery. Thought autopsy. Thought autopsy is the mental forensic technique that turns every troubling thought into a case study, dissecting it to reveal its true origins, motives, and lies. Most people let negative or anxious thoughts run unchecked, believing they're facts instead of faulty stories. Autopsy demands you become a detective of your own mind, examining each thought with ruthless curiosity before accepting its verdict. When a troubling thought arises, I'm not good enough, they'll reject me, I always fail, you don't just feel it or push it away. Instead, you pause and dissect it. Where did this thought come from? Is it rooted in past trauma, someone else's opinion, or a distorted fear? What evidence supports it, and what contradicts it? How does this thought serve you, if at all? This process isn't easy. It requires honesty and patience. But with every autopsy, the power of toxic thoughts diminishes. You see them for what they are, borrowed, exaggerated, or outright false. And when a thought's body is laid bare, its grip on your emotions loosens. The emotional charge fades because understanding kills mystery. Fear thrives in darkness, but thought autopsy turns on the light. Over time, your mind rewires from automatic acceptance to critical analysis. You become less reactive and more discerning. Thought autopsy doesn't promise a painless mind, but it promises freedom. The freedom to question, to challenge, and to rewrite the stories that once ruled you. In becoming your own mental detective, you reclaim control over the narratives that shape your life. Mood disguising tactic. Mood disguising tactic is the covert mental skill of deliberately altering your outward emotional signals, not to fake authenticity, but to influence how your brain processes feelings internally. Often, moods trap us in feedback loops. Feeling down makes us act withdrawn, and acting withdrawn makes us feel worse. This trick flips that loop by using deliberate behavior to reshape emotion from the outside in. When the mind senses certain cues, posture, tone, facial expression, it responds accordingly. Slouching signals defeat, smiling sparks joy. Mood disguising exploits this connection by consciously adjusting those cues to trick the brain into feeling differently. Even if the heart feels heavy, standing tall, breathing deeply, and softening your face sends signals that say, I'm okay. The body believes it and begins to shift the mood. This isn't pretending or denial. It's a form of emotional biofeedback. The brain can't always tell the difference between genuine feeling and the signals sent by your body. So when you act as if confident, calm, or happy, those feelings start to follow. The power lies in repetition. The more you practice mood disguising, the faster the brain updates its internal state. Moments of anxiety shorten, waves of sadness soften, a tough day loses its weight. Over time, mood disguising creates a buffer, a space between mood and action, where you're no longer hostage to how you feel right now. You become the director of your own emotional weather, choosing the signals you send before the storm even arrives. It's a quiet, powerful way to hack your mind and change your life, one small gesture at a time. Identity-based filtering. Identity-based filtering is the powerful mental habit of using your core sense of self as a sieve for every thought, feeling, and influence that tries to enter your mind. Most people let external noise, opinions, and fleeting emotions flood their mental landscape unchecked, reacting to everything without pause. This trick rewires the brain to filter incoming information through the lens of who you truly are, what you value, what you stand for, and what kind of person you choose to be. Instead of absorbing every criticism, doubt, or temptation as truth, identity-based filtering teaches you to ask, does this belong to my story? If the answer is no, the thought doesn't get in. It's like having a mental bouncer who guards the gate to your inner world, letting only what aligns with your authentic self pass through. This technique cultivates clarity and resilience because it anchors you in being, not just doing. When faced with negativity or distraction, you don't scramble or suppress. You recognize that those messages aren't your identity speaking. They're noise, not narrative. Over time, identity-based filtering builds a protective boundary around your mind, reducing internal conflict and decision fatigue. You act less out of reaction and more out of intention because your responses align with the version of yourself you respect and aspire to become. In a world overloaded with inputs demanding attention, this filtering system becomes a lifeline. It turns the flood of thoughts into a clear stream, one that carries only what serves your purpose, strengthens your character, and deepens your sense of self. Reverse scarcity mindset. Reverse scarcity mindset is the mental shift that transforms the feeling of never enough into a deep knowing of abundance, not by chasing more, but by appreciating what already is. Most people live trapped in scarcity, not enough time, money, love, opportunities. This constant lack drives desperation, fear, and frantic grasping. But reverse scarcity flips the narrative. It rewires the brain to see plenty in the present moment, breaking the cycle of want and need. Instead of focusing on what's missing, this mindset trains you to notice what's overflowing. The breaths you take, the skills you've built, the people who care. It's not blind optimism. It's fierce realism tempered by gratitude. When scarcity whispers, "There isn't enough," reverse scarcity answers, "There's more than I realize." The practice begins by consciously catching scarcity thoughts and pausing before reacting. You ask, "Is this true, or is it fear speaking?" Then you reframe, "I have enough resources to start," or "Opportunities exist beyond what I see." Over time, this mental habit strengthens, creating a cushion of confidence that softens stress and fuels action. Reverse scarcity reduces anxiety by cutting the endless what-if loop. It replaces pressure with permission. Permission to begin, permission to trust, permission to rest. It shifts your relationship with risk from desperate clutching to curious exploration. Eventually, this mindset doesn't just change your thinking, it changes your life. Doors open not because you begged, but because you knew enough was already waiting. The hunger fades, the grasping stops, and in that space, freedom quietly grows. Cognitive shadowboxing. Cognitive shadowboxing is the mental practice of wrestling with your own doubts, fears, and limiting beliefs before they catch you off guard. Like a boxer sparring with an invisible opponent, you bring those hidden voices into the light, test their strength, and learn their moves so they no longer sneak up and knock you down. Most people let negative thoughts build momentum in the shadows, whispers of "I can't," "I'm not enough," or "it's too late," until they explode unexpectedly, sabotaging confidence and clarity. Cognitive shadowboxing flips this by inviting those thoughts into conscious awareness. You face them deliberately, examine their triggers, and challenge their power with mental agility. This isn't a battle to silence your inner critic, but a dance to understand and outmaneuver it. You anticipate how fear tries to distract, how doubt tries to freeze, and how old stories try to rerun. You practice responses, rehearse reframes, and build mental reflexes that deflect attacks before they land. Over time, shadowboxing sharpens self-awareness and emotional resilience. The once hidden fears lose their surprise factor. The internal dialogue shifts from reaction to response. Instead of being blindsided by anxiety or self-sabotage, you meet those challenges head-on with strategy, calm, and confidence. In the ring of the mind, cognitive shadowboxing doesn't guarantee a knockout every time, but it ensures you're never unprepared. You learn to dance with your shadows, not be consumed by them. And in that mastery lies the quiet power to keep moving forward, no matter what fights arise inside. Attention slotting. Attention slotting is the intentional art of giving every thought, feeling, or task a precise place and time, so your mind stops running wild with overwhelm and distraction. Most people let their attention scatter like leaves in the wind, reacting to every ping, worry, or impulse as if it demands instant action. This chaos fractures focus and drains energy. Attention slotting says, Not now, not everywhere, but here and only here. The technique works by mentally assigning slots for different concerns, specific windows when you allow yourself to engage with certain thoughts or tasks. Instead of letting anxiety sneak in during a conversation, you note it, then schedule a worry slot later to fully process it. Instead of flipping between emails, calls, and daydreams, you dedicate clear blocks for each. This creates boundaries inside your own mind. You tell the brain, this is the time for work, that's the time for reflection, that's the time for rest. And by honoring these slots, your nervous system learns to relax, knowing the scattered demands will be handled, just not all at once. Attention slotting reduces mental noise and boosts productivity, not by doing more, but by doing less at once. It turns chaotic multitasking into focused presence. The brain no longer races to catch every thought but waits patiently for its turn. With practice, attention slotting becomes second nature. You stop exhausting yourself chasing every mental squirrel. Instead, you move through your day with calm precision, fully present in each slot you open, turning distraction into discipline and overwhelm into flow. Authenticity Paradox Hack. The authenticity paradox hack reveals a surprising truth. The more you chase being authentic, the farther away it slips. And yet, the moment you stop trying, authenticity flows effortlessly. Most people think authenticity means expressing every thought, every feeling, every raw moment exactly as it arises. But this unfiltered truth often backfires, creating confusion, discomfort, or rejection. The paradox is that genuine connection isn't about relentless honesty. It's about intentional honesty. This hack is about balance between showing who you are and shaping how you're seen. It's about aligning your actions with your values, but also reading the room. When you act purely from impulse, authenticity feels chaotic. When you hide behind masks, it feels fake. The sweet spot is somewhere in between, honest expression with awareness. The paradox deepens because authenticity often means vulnerability, but not all vulnerability builds trust. Some vulnerability pushes people away. The hack teaches you to curate your truth, sharing enough to connect deeply, but holding back enough to protect your energy. This isn't manipulation. It's self-respect. It's saying, I am real, but I am also wise. You become a person who doesn't apologize for their truth, yet knows when to listen, when to pause, and when to adapt. Over time, this balance creates magnetic authenticity. People feel your honesty without feeling overwhelmed. The paradox resolves itself when you stop trying so hard to be authentic and start simply being present, intentional, and true to your highest self. In that space, authenticity isn't a struggle. It's your natural state. Reaction delay, repetition, reaction delay. Repetition is the powerful habit of training yourself to pause every single time before responding until that pause becomes instinct, not effort. Most people react automatically, triggered by emotions, words, or situations without a moment's thought. This impulsiveness fuels regret, conflict, and loss of control. But by deliberately delaying reaction repeatedly, you teach your brain to switch from reflex to choice. Every time a strong feeling arises, anger, frustration, excitement, you consciously hit pause. Just a breath, maybe two, maybe a count to 5. That split second is a doorway, a space where raw emotion softens enough for reason to step in. You don't suppress the feeling, you simply defer the response. Over and over, this creates a new pattern. The magic lies in repetition. One pause is a reminder. 100 pauses become habit. The brain learns to default to this moment of stillness. It rewires the impulse circuit into a thoughtful pause button. This isn't about avoidance. It's about gaining mastery over your internal dialogue and the power to respond how you want, not how you're pushed. Repeated reaction delay also helps separate feeling from action. You may still feel anger, but you don't have to shout. You may feel hurt, but you don't have to withdraw. The pause allows for clarity, choice, and sometimes grace. Over time, this practice transforms your relationships and your inner world. You become someone who doesn't just react, you respond. Not because you're perfect, but because you've trained your mind to choose presence over impulse. And that makes all the difference. Subconscious suggestion seeding. Subconscious suggestion seeding is the quiet, powerful art of planting ideas beneath the surface of your awareness so they grow without resistance and reshape your reality from the inside out. Most people believe change happens only through conscious effort, but the mind is constantly listening, absorbing, and adapting in subtle ways beyond direct awareness. This trick taps into that hidden channel by repeatedly exposing yourself to carefully chosen words, images, or feelings that guide your subconscious toward new patterns. The process starts with intention. You identify a belief or behavior you want to nurture, confidence, calm, focus, and then you feed it seeds. It might be a phrase you repeat quietly each day, a visual you imagine before sleep, or even a song that stirs the feeling you seek. These seeds are not forced commands, but gentle suggestions, planted softly so the subconscious accepts them without resistance. Over time, these suggestions take root. The brain weaves them into its neural fabric, altering habits, reactions, and emotional responses naturally and effortlessly. Because the subconscious operates beneath the critical mind, it doesn't argue or doubt, it simply absorbs. This technique is why repeated affirmations work best when paired with feeling, repetition, and subtlety, not shouting or pressure. It's the slow unfolding of change, not an overnight miracle. Subconscious suggestion seeding turns the mind into a fertile garden, one where the thoughts you want grow stronger, while old limiting patterns wither away. And because it happens beneath conscious strain, it feels effortless, natural, and deeply transformative. Meta-awareness loop. Meta-awareness loop is the extraordinary skill of stepping outside your own thoughts and emotions to watch them unfold, without judgment, attachment, or panic. Most people get caught inside their minds, tangled in worries, regrets, and endless mental chatter, mistaking being their thoughts for having their thoughts. Meta-awareness creates a powerful loop where you become the observer of your mind, not its hostage. This trick begins with a moment, a tiny crack in autopilot. You notice a thought rising, a feeling swelling, and instead of diving in, you step back. You say to yourself, "There's that anxiety again," or "Here comes the inner critic." That simple acknowledgement creates space between you and the storm inside. It's like watching rain fall from a dry window instead of being soaked by it. The loop builds as you practice returning to this observer state again and again. With each cycle, the brain learns that thoughts and feelings are transient guests, not rulers. They come, they linger, they leave, and you remain steady. This doesn't mean detachment or numbness. It means clarity. It means freedom from the trap of identifying completely with whatever passes through your mind. Meta-awareness loops open the door to emotional resilience and mental calm. Over time, this practice rewires the brain's default from reaction to reflection. You no longer get swept away by every wave. Instead, you ride them with awareness, choosing when to engage and when to simply be. And in that loop of watching without drowning, you reclaim the ultimate power, control over your own mind. Self-concept, shattering. Self-concept shattering is a powerful mental technique that breaks down the rigid story you tell yourself about who you are, especially the limiting parts that keep you stuck. Everyone carries an identity, a mental blueprint of me, made up of habits, beliefs, and memories. Most of these stories run on autopilot, quietly dictating what feels possible and what doesn't. But when that self-concept is fragile or negative, it becomes a cage disguised as comfort. This trick shatters that cage by deliberately challenging and dismantling those deeply held assumptions. You question the parts of your identity that say, I'm not capable, I'm always unlucky, or I'm not enough. You push hard against the mental walls, intentionally confronting the beliefs that feel most real but cause the most pain. It's uncomfortable because the self is resisting, but breaking those mental patterns creates a vacuum where transformation can happen. When old definitions crumble, new possibilities flood in. Self-concept shattering doesn't mean losing yourself. It means losing the false parts you've mistaken for the whole. It's the painful, chaotic process before rebirth. By tearing down limiting stories, you free the mind to rewrite the narrative. You move from being trapped in who you thought you were to becoming whoever you choose to be. This is not a gentle trick. It's a revolution within. But in that upheaval lies profound freedom, because sometimes you have to break to build better. Anti-comparison habit. The anti-comparison habit is a radical mental shift that frees you from the exhausting and endless trap of measuring yourself against others. Most people live life through a lens of comparison, counting successes, appearances, or achievements as if those numbers define worth. This habit rewires that default, teaching the brain to stop the scroll, the envy, the silent self-judgment before it takes hold. Comparison feels natural because the brain craves reference points, but it's a double-edged sword. Every upward glance ignites insecurity, doubt, and distraction. The anti-comparison habit teaches you to recognize that impulse early, and instead of chasing it, you turn away. You shift focus inward, not to ignore the world, but to refuse its false standards. Practicing this habit means catching yourself mid-judgment. When you think, they're doing better, or I don't measure up, you pause and reframe. Their path is theirs, mine is mine. You cultivate gratitude for your unique journey and progress, no matter how small or slow it feels. Over time, this habit rewires your sense of identity from external validation to internal alignment. You stop living to impress or compete and start living to express your true self. The mental noise of comparison fades, replaced by a calm confidence rooted in authenticity. This shift doesn't make you complacent. It makes you unstoppable because you're no longer distracted by others' races. You run your own, and in that freedom, you unlock your fullest potential. Emotional echo chamber collapse. Emotional echo chamber collapse is the mental breakthrough that frees you from the endless loop of your own feelings bouncing back and forth, amplifying fear, anger, or sadness until they consume you. Most people get trapped inside emotional echo chambers where every thought and feeling reflects and intensifies the last, like being stuck inside a room with no exit and a microphone that repeats every whisper louder and louder. This technique shatters that loop by forcing a break in the pattern, introducing a new perspective, sensation, or action that interrupts the cycle. It's not about denying emotion, but about refusing to let it feed itself endlessly. You might change your environment, shift your focus deliberately, or physically move to disrupt the internal feedback. When the echo chamber collapses, the emotion no longer has a wall to bounce off. The amplification stops. The storm inside slows. You gain space to breathe, think, and respond with clarity instead of reaction. The power of this technique lies in awareness. Noticing when you're stuck in a feedback loop is the first step. Then choosing to step outside it, even briefly, breaks the rhythm and rewires your nervous system. Over time, emotional echo chamber collapse teaches the mind that feelings aren't prisons, but signals. And signals don't have to repeat forever. They can change course, fade, and lose their grip. In that collapse, freedom begins, not by silencing emotion, but by breaking its endless reverberation inside your head. Anxiety as task signal. Anxiety as task signal is the mental reframing that transforms nervous energy from a paralyzing curse into a clear, actionable cue. Most people experience anxiety as a vague, overwhelming force, an enemy to silence or escape. But this trick teaches you to see anxiety as your brain's way of saying something important needs your attention. Instead of resisting the knot in your stomach or the racing heart, you lean in and ask, what is this feeling trying to tell me? Anxiety becomes a compass, pointing toward what requires focus, preparation, or change. It's no longer random noise, but a meaningful signal, directing you toward tasks that matter. This shift changes the relationship with fear and worry. The sensation still feels intense, but it's no longer an obstacle, it's a guide. Like the warning light on a dashboard, anxiety signals the need to slow down, check your course, or take action before things worsen. By treating anxiety as a task signal, you replace helplessness with purpose. The question moves from, why am I so anxious, to, what's the next step I can take? This turns overwhelm into momentum and dread into direction. Over time, this habit rewires the nervous system. Anxiety becomes less about panic and more about preparation. Instead of freezing in fear, you respond with clarity. The energy behind anxiety is no longer wasted, it's channeled. And that's when nervousness stops being a foe and starts being a powerful ally, pushing you toward growth. Ego Starvation Challenge. The Ego Starvation Challenge is a radical mental practice designed to starve the relentless voice inside that constantly demands approval, validation, and attention. Most people feed their ego daily through likes, compliments, winning arguments, or being right, never realizing how much this constant nourishment traps them in anxiety, comparison, and emotional dependency. This technique flips the game by intentionally withholding the usual ego snacks, forcing the self to find strength from a deeper place. The challenge begins by noticing when your ego seeks validation, the urge to be praised, to win, to be seen, and then choosing not to feed it. You might stay silent when craving recognition, resist the urge to defend yourself, or pause before seeking approval. It's uncomfortable because the ego thrives on constant attention, but that discomfort is the signal that change is happening. As the ego starves, the noisy demands quiet. The mind starts searching for internal sources of worth rather than external trophies. You begin to realize that true confidence isn't built on applause but on self-acceptance. This isn't about ego elimination, it's about recalibration, teaching the ego to stand down so the authentic self can step forward. Over time, the challenge builds resilience to criticism, rejection, and insecurity, because the neediness that once fueled those fears diminishes. The Ego Starvation Challenge creates a space where actions come from purpose, not ego, where approval is a bonus, not a lifeline, and in that space, a more grounded, peaceful, and powerful version of yourself begins to emerge, one that no longer starves for attention, but shines from within. Thought Inventory Reduction. Thought inventory reduction is the disciplined practice of clearing mental clutter by systematically examining and releasing unnecessary or harmful thoughts. Most people carry a crowded mind filled with doubts, what-ifs, regrets, and recycled worries that weighs heavily on their emotional energy. This technique helps you take stock of your mental landscape, identify what's dragging you down, and consciously let it go. The process begins with awareness. You pause to list what's occupying your mind, every nagging fear, lingering regret, or distracting impulse. Then, instead of letting them swirl unchecked, you question their value. Is this thought serving me? Is it true? Is it necessary right now? If the answer is no, you gently discard it from your inventory. This isn't about suppressing thoughts or forcing positivity. It's about choosing which mental possessions to keep and which to release. Like decluttering a physical space, clearing mental baggage creates room for clarity, focus, and peace. The power of this technique lies in repetition. Regularly reviewing and reducing your thought inventory trains your brain to resist hoarding negativity or distractions. You become more selective with what earns your attention. Over time, this reduction lightens your cognitive load. You stop reacting to every stray worry or self-criticism. Instead, you cultivate mental space, a calm environment where intentional, constructive thoughts can grow. Thought inventory reduction isn't just cleaning up, it's reclaiming your mind's bandwidth so you can live with greater presence, resilience, and freedom. Mind obstacle hallucination. Mind obstacle hallucination is the unsettling yet liberating realization that many of the barriers blocking your progress exist only in your perception, not in reality. The mind creates vivid, convincing illusions of insurmountable walls, impossible challenges, and dead ends, trapping you in a maze of self-doubt and fear. These obstacles feel as real as concrete, but they are often distorted reflections of uncertainty, past trauma, or ingrained beliefs. This trick exposes those hallucinations by training you to question the solidity of your mental blocks. When you face what seems like an immovable problem, you pause and ask, is this truly a wall or just a shadow I'm projecting? You examine the evidence, test the boundaries, and imagine alternative paths that your mind has hidden from view. The process isn't about denying difficulty or pretending everything is easy. It's about separating perception from fact, recognizing that the mind sometimes magnifies problems to protect you from risk, not to trap you indefinitely. Once you spot these hallucinated obstacles, their power diminishes. The fear they feed on begins to fade. What seemed like a cliff becomes a step. What felt like a prison becomes a door. Mind obstacle hallucination teaches you that progress often depends less on the problem itself and more on how clearly you see it. When the illusion breaks, freedom follows, and suddenly the way forward isn't blocked, it's waiting. Rejection neutralization. Rejection neutralization is the mental technique that strips away the sting of no by rewriting what it means deep inside your mind. Most people hear rejection and feel it as a personal failure, a verdict on their worth, or proof that they're unlovable or inadequate. This reaction cuts deep, fueling self-doubt and fear of trying again. But rejection neutralization teaches you to decouple rejection from identity and see it as neutral feedback, not judgment. This trick begins by changing the story you tell yourself when rejection hits. Instead of internalizing, "They don't want me," you say, "This wasn't the right fit," or "This is part of the process." You remind yourself that rejection is a universal experience, not a unique punishment. It's simply a redirection, a data point on a map, not a final destination. The mental shift softens the emotional blow. The hurt is acknowledged but contained. You learn to respond with curiosity instead of shame. What can I learn here? How can I grow? This reduces fear around rejection and opens space for resilience. Rejection neutralization also rewires anticipation. When you expect rejection without dread, it loses power. You become willing to risk vulnerability because the fall no longer feels fatal. Over time, this technique transforms rejection from an enemy into a teacher. It frees you to pursue goals without paralysis, knowing that no is not the end of the story, but a necessary step on the way to something better. And in that freedom, confidence quietly grows, unshaken by the rejections that once threatened to break you. Intentional confusion tolerance. Intentional confusion tolerance is the mental practice of embracing uncertainty and disorientation as a pathway to growth rather than a trigger for anxiety. Most people instinctively recoil from confusion. It feels uncomfortable, unsettling, and threatening to control. But this technique teaches you to sit with the fog, to tolerate the unclear and the unknown without rushing for answers or certainty. Confusion is often the brain's way of signaling that it's in the middle of learning or adapting. Instead of fighting that state, intentional confusion tolerance says, lean into it. Allow yourself to feel lost without panic. Let your mind wander without judgment. Recognize that clarity doesn't always come immediately. It often emerges after you've endured the messiness of not knowing. This tolerance rewires your relationship with discomfort. Rather than trying to escape confusion with distraction or premature conclusions, you hold space for it. You pause, you breathe, you remind yourself that it's okay not to have it all figured out right now. Over time, this practice expands your mental resilience. You become less reactive to ambiguity and more patient with complexity. The brain learns that confusion isn't danger, it's transition. In a world that demands quick fixes and instant answers, the ability to tolerate intentional confusion becomes a rare strength. It's the quiet skill that lets you navigate uncertainty with calm, grow through chaos, and emerge on the other side, not with perfect knowledge, but with wisdom born from endurance. Controlled boredom. Immersion. Controlled boredom immersion is the deliberate practice of stepping into moments of boredom, not to escape or distract, but to build mental resilience and sharpen focus. In today's world, constant stimulation has rewired the brain to avoid boredom at all costs. Smartphones, notifications, endless entertainment, it's a non-stop chase for novelty. This technique flips that habit by teaching you to lean into boredom, using it as a tool for self-mastery rather than a prison of restlessness. When boredom strikes, instead of reaching for distraction, you pause. You sit with the emptiness, the quiet, the slow pulse of time passing. You observe the discomfort without trying to fix it. This immersion lets your mind recalibrate, shedding the need for constant external input. Boredom, when faced head-on, reveals hidden layers of creativity, curiosity, and clarity. It's the brain's reset button. It forces you to confront your thoughts, desires, and sometimes discomforts without anesthetic. Over time, you become comfortable with silence inside, not just outside. The power of controlled boredom lies in repetition. Each moment spent deliberately bored strengthens your ability to focus, tolerate discomfort, and resist impulsive distractions. You build patience, deepen self-awareness, and sharpen mental endurance. Eventually, boredom stops feeling like a void and becomes fertile ground. It's where ideas grow, where presence deepens, and where you reclaim control over attention. Controlled boredom immersion isn't about suffering. It's about training your mind to find peace in stillness and power in waiting. Observer state initiation. Observer state initiation is the transformative mental skill of stepping back from your experience to watch it unfold with calm curiosity, becoming the witness rather than the participant in your own emotional storms. Most people get swept up in their feelings, thoughts, and reactions, losing sight of the bigger picture. This technique trains the mind to create a mental distance, allowing you to see yourself from the outside, clear and undistorted. It begins with a simple moment of awareness, noticing when emotions rise or thoughts spiral, then consciously shifting into an observer mode. You say to yourself, I am not this anger, I am not this worry, I am the one noticing it. This tiny reframing creates a break in identification with the immediate experience. The power of this shift lies in the space it creates. Instead of being trapped inside the intensity, you become spacious. The emotional heat cools. The mental noise softens. You gain clarity to respond wisely rather than react impulsively. Over time, initiating the observer state becomes habitual. You build a buffer between stimulus and response, turning chaos into data. This doesn't mean detachment or denial. It means presence and acceptance with clarity. By becoming your own observer, you gain mastery over the mind's fluctuations. The storms no longer control you. You hold the umbrella. And in that space of witnessing without drowning, resilience and peace quietly take root. Shame disintegration. Protocol. Shame disintegration protocol is the radical mental process of breaking down shame's grip until it dissolves into harmless fragments. Shame is one of the most corrosive emotions, a secret poison that convinces you you're fundamentally flawed, unworthy, or broken. Most people hide from it, deny it, or let it fester quietly in the shadows. This technique doesn't avoid shame. It confronts it head-on, dismantling its power piece by piece. The protocol begins by naming the shame without flinching. You identify exactly what you're ashamed of, whether it's a mistake, a part of your identity, or a past event, and bring it fully into the light of awareness. By doing this, shame loses the secrecy that fuels it. Next, you dissect the story shame tells you. You ask, is this belief true? Whose voice is this? Theirs or mine? What evidence supports or contradicts it? This process fractures shame's narrative, revealing it as a constructed story rather than absolute truth. The protocol continues with compassionate self-talk and radical acceptance. You treat the parts you're ashamed of as you would a hurt child, with kindness, patience, and understanding. This softens shame's hold and invites healing. Repetition is key. Each time shame arises, you run it through the protocol again. Over time, shame's intensity fades. What once felt like an earthquake becomes a passing tremor. Shame disintegration protocol doesn't erase accountability or growth. It transforms shame from a cage into a teacher, one that no longer defines your worth but guides your evolution. And in that transformation, you reclaim the freedom to be imperfect and fully human. Inner dialogue translation. Inner dialogue translation is the profound mental practice of listening to your internal chatter and transforming its harsh, confusing language into clear, compassionate messages. Most people's inner voice is tangled, filled with self-criticism, mixed signals, and emotional static. This technique acts like a translator, decoding those chaotic thoughts into understandable, gentle guidance that the mind can actually use. The process begins by tuning in closely to your thoughts, the raw feelings behind the words. Instead of getting overwhelmed or swept away by negativity, you pause and ask, what is this really trying to say? Often, harsh self-judgment masks fear, sadness, or unmet needs. Translating that voice means gently rephrasing, I'm overwhelmed, instead of I'm a failure, or I need support, instead of I'm weak. This shift is subtle but powerful. It changes the tone from accusation to understanding. The brain responds not to truth, but to meaning, and reframing internal language rewires emotional responses. The confusing becomes clear. The chaotic becomes manageable. With practice, inner dialogue translation builds a bridge between your conscious mind and your deeper feelings. It invites curiosity and kindness into places that were once rigid judgment. Instead of silencing the voice inside, you listen differently, and in that listening, healing begins. This technique doesn't erase struggle, it transforms it. It turns your inner critic into a compassionate coach, and your mental noise into a meaningful conversation. And in that new dialogue, a path to peace and clarity quietly opens. Perception reprioritization. Perception reprioritization is the mental skill of consciously choosing which details of experience deserve attention and which can be safely ignored, rewiring how the mind filters reality. Most people's perception is an unfiltered flood of stimuli, thoughts, and emotions competing for dominance, leaving them overwhelmed, anxious, or reactive. This technique teaches you to become the gatekeeper of your awareness, deciding what matters most in every moment. The process starts by noticing what you're focusing on, perhaps a critical voice, a small mistake, or a future worry, and then deliberately shifting your spotlight to something else, a breath, a supportive memory, a concrete fact. You reorder your priorities so that attention flows toward elements that empower, calm, or clarify instead of those that drain or distract. This reprioritization changes your internal narrative. What once seemed urgent becomes trivial. What once triggered panic becomes background noise. Your emotional energy follows your perception. So by changing the filter, you change your response. Repeated practice strengthens this skill. The brain adapts, learning to default to healthier focus points automatically. Over time, you become less reactive to distractions, more resilient in stress, and more present in moments that matter. Perception reprioritization doesn't deny reality, it refines it. It's not about ignoring problems, but choosing which parts deserve your fight and which deserve your peace. In mastering this, you reclaim control over your experience and create a mental environment where clarity and calm aren't accidental, they're intentional. Conflict Curiosity Lens. Conflict Curiosity Lens is the mental shift that transforms tense moments from battlegrounds into opportunities for discovery. Most people react to conflict with defensiveness, fear, or anger, seeing it as a threat to be won or avoided. This technique invites you to look at conflict through a lens of curiosity instead, asking what's really going on here, rather than reacting to the surface fight. When tension rises, instead of diving into blame or shutdown, you pause and observe. You seek to understand the underlying needs, fears, or miscommunications driving the clash. This curiosity softens rigid stances and opens space for empathy. It turns adversaries into teachers and arguments into puzzles to solve. The power of this lens is that it rewires your nervous system from threat mode to learning mode. Conflict no longer triggers a shutdown or fight response, but sparks questions and exploration. You become less reactive and more reflective, more interested in meaning than victory. Over time, practicing conflict curiosity shifts relationships and self-awareness. You develop patience with discomfort and skill at navigating tension without losing presence. What once felt like chaos becomes a doorway to deeper connection and understanding. This approach doesn't guarantee peace or agreement, but it guarantees transformation, because when you choose curiosity over judgment, you change the game. Conflict stops being an enemy and becomes a teacher, leading you toward growth you never expected. Thought disowning. Thought disowning is the powerful mental practice of recognizing that not every thought belongs to you and learning to release those that don't serve your true self. Most people live trapped in a flood of internal chatter, mistaking every passing idea, fear, or judgment as a core part of who they are. This identification fuels anxiety, self-doubt, and emotional overwhelm. Thought disowning teaches you to become the discerning observer, separating transient noise from authentic truth. The process begins by noticing intrusive or negative thoughts as they arise, those harsh self-critiques, unhelpful worries, or outdated beliefs, and mentally stepping back. Instead of engaging, you say internally, "This thought isn't mine," or "I don't need to believe this." You create a boundary between your conscious self and the flood of mental input. This act of disowning doesn't suppress thoughts or deny their presence. It acknowledges them without attachment, allowing them to pass through your mind without grabbing hold. It's like watching clouds drift by rather than getting caught in a storm. With practice, this cultivates emotional freedom. You become less reactive, less defined by every mood swing or mental narrative. Your sense of self grows stable, rooted in awareness rather than fleeting mental patterns. Thought disowning isn't about rejecting reality. It's about reclaiming sovereignty over your mind. By refusing to own every thought, you reduce mental clutter and create space for clarity, calm, and intentional living. In that space, you discover who you truly are, beyond the noise. Inner dialogue. Inner dialogue echo is the subtle yet powerful phenomenon where the voice inside your head repeats itself, sometimes endlessly, amplifying doubts, fears, or old stories until they feel overwhelming. Most people aren't aware their thoughts aren't just passing by. They bounce around, echoing louder and louder in the quiet chambers of the mind. This trick reveals how to interrupt that cycle by recognizing and reshaping those echoes before they take over. The mind loves repetition because it deepens belief. When a negative thought, "I'm not enough," or "they'll reject me," keeps replaying, it gains authority, making it feel like undeniable truth. The echo makes the doubt persistent, turning a whisper into a roar that colors perception and drains energy. Inner dialogue echo teaches you to catch these loops early. Noticing when your mind is stuck in repeat mode, you gently shift focus or introduce a new thought that breaks the pattern, like changing the station on a stuck record. This doesn't mean forcing positivity or denial, but consciously choosing to stop fueling the negative reverberations. With practice, the echoes lose power, the mental soundtrack quiets. You create space for fresh, more balanced narratives to take root. You learn that thoughts are not commands, just sounds, and you control the volume. By mastering inner dialogue echo, you gain freedom from mental ruts. The noise becomes manageable background, not overwhelming flood. And in that calm, your mind can finally hear the voice of clarity, choice, and self-compassion, breaking the echo and breaking free. Gratitude Reversal Test. Gratitude Reversal Test is the mental exercise of flipping your perspective to uncover hidden blessings in what initially feels like loss or hardship. Most people see gratitude as something reserved for obvious joys, sunny days, kind words, big wins. But this technique challenges you to dig deeper, to find gratitude inside the struggle, disappointment, or pain. When faced with a difficult situation, instead of shutting down or resisting, you ask, what if this setback is actually a gift? What hidden lesson or opportunity might it be disguising? This reversal interrupts the usual spiral of resentment or despair, opening a crack for appreciation where none seem possible. The brain resists this at first. Gratitude feels forced or fake when times are hard, but repeated practice rewires emotional habits. You start to notice small silver linings, the strength built through adversity, the clarity born from confusion, the connections forged in vulnerability. This test doesn't erase pain. It doesn't pretend everything is perfect. Instead, it layers gratitude over hardship, creating emotional depth and resilience. The mind begins to reframe challenge as part of growth rather than opposition to it. Over time, gratitude reversal changes your internal narrative from victim to student. You learn to welcome discomfort with curiosity and appreciation, because even pain carries gifts. And in this radical shift, gratitude becomes less about circumstance and more about choice, the choice to see life's fullness, even when the surface feels rough. Internal sarcasm, disruption. Internal sarcasm disruption is the clever mental tactic of catching and silencing the harsh, mocking voice inside that belittles your efforts and mocks your hopes. Most people aren't aware that beneath the surface of self-criticism lurks a sarcastic tone, one that twists kindness into cruelty, turning mistakes into punchlines and vulnerability into jokes at your expense. This voice doesn't just hurt, it undermines your confidence with a sharp edge disguised as humor. This trick begins with awareness, noticing when your inner voice takes a sarcastic turn. The phrase, "Oh great, you messed up again," "What a surprise," or "Sure, like you could actually pull that off," are classic examples. Once recognized, you interrupt this sarcasm like a rude comment at a dinner table. You refuse to laugh along. Disrupting internal sarcasm means shifting the tone from mockery to respect. You respond with kindness. "I'm trying and that's enough," or "Mistakes are part of learning." You change the script from biting humor to gentle encouragement. This change rewires how your brain processes self-talk. Sarcasm, once normalized, becomes jarring. Your mind starts craving a softer, more supportive tone. Over time, the sarcastic internal commentator loses its seat at the table. By breaking this cycle, you reclaim your inner dialogue as a source of strength, not sabotage. Internal sarcasm disruption transforms the voice inside from a sneering critic into a patient coach, turning self-doubt's sting into steady, nurturing growth. Identity lag awareness. Identity lag awareness is the powerful realization that the person you think you are right now is often a reflection of your past self, not the one you are becoming. Most people carry outdated self-images like heavy baggage, unaware that their identity is stuck in old stories, fears, or limitations. This lag between who you were and who you're becoming creates inner conflict, frustration, and self-sabotage. Awareness of this gap is the first step toward closing it. This mental trick involves observing your thoughts, feelings, and behaviors with curiosity, asking, "Is this who I want to be or who I used to be?" You recognize when your reactions are automatic, conditioned by past experiences rather than present choices. You spot when old identities, "I'm shy," "I'm a failure," "I'm not enough," are running the show without your permission. By bringing this lag into awareness, you create space to update your self-concept. You begin to act as the person you want to become, even if it feels unfamiliar or uncomfortable. This disconnect starts to shrink as your actions, beliefs, and identity realign. Identity lag awareness doesn't demand overnight transformation. It invites patience and compassion as you step out of old shadows and into new light. It reframes change as a process of catching up with your own potential. With time, this awareness becomes a compass, guiding you through doubt and hesitation toward a self that is authentic, evolving, and free from the chains of the past. It's not about who you were, but who you choose to be now. Mental consequence mapping. Mental consequence mapping is the deliberate practice of tracing the ripple effects of your thoughts, choices, and emotions before they spiral out of control. Most people react impulsively without fully grasping how one small decision can cascade into a web of unintended consequences, fueling regret, anxiety, or conflict. This technique trains the mind to pause and visualize potential outcomes clearly, creating mental foresight that sharpens decision-making and calms chaos. The process begins by imagining a thought or action as the start of a chain reaction. What happens next? How does it affect your mood, relationships, or goals? What might the other person feel or do? By mapping these consequences mentally, you catch the bigger picture instead of getting trapped in momentary urges or fears. This foresight creates distance. Instead of being swept away by impulse, you become the architect of your responses, choosing paths that align with long-term well-being rather than short-term relief. Mental consequence mapping doesn't predict the future perfectly, but it prepares you to navigate it wisely. Over time, this habit rewires the brain's decision loops. You move from reactive to proactive. Emotional storms lose intensity because you anticipate their triggers and outcomes. You gain clarity not just on what you want, but how to get there with less collateral damage. In the chaos of life's pressures, mental consequence mapping becomes a quiet anchor, helping you steer with awareness, avoid pitfalls, and make choices that honor both your present and your future self. Emotional misinformation testing. Emotional misinformation testing is the practice of questioning whether the feelings experienced in a moment accurately reflect reality, or if they're distorted signals shaped by fear, bias, or past trauma. Most people assume their emotions are facts, letting anxiety, jealousy, or sadness dictate their worldview. This technique teaches you to become a detective of your own feelings, separating truth from emotional noise. When a strong emotion arises, like anger or doubt, you pause and ask, is this feeling based on what's actually happening, or is it a story my mind is telling me? You examine the evidence supporting the emotion. You challenge assumptions and consider alternative explanations. This internal investigation slows down the rush to judgment and opens space for clarity. The brain often confuses intensity with accuracy. A loud emotion feels more real, but that doesn't mean it's correct. Emotional misinformation testing trains you to recognize when your feelings might be exaggerating risks, misreading intentions, or replaying old wounds. This practice reduces impulsive reactions driven by false alarms. It cultivates emotional literacy, the ability to name, understand, and regulate feelings without being overwhelmed. Over time, you build resilience by not accepting every emotional message as gospel. Emotional misinformation testing doesn't silence emotions. It empowers you to navigate them wisely. By testing the validity of what you feel, you reclaim control over your experience, choosing responses grounded in reality instead of distorted perception. In that space, emotional wisdom grows and peace follows. Social simulation shutdown. Social simulation shutdown is the mental defense mechanism of intentionally turning off the constant, exhausting mental rehearsal of social scenarios that drain focus and energy. Most people's minds run endless loops, imagining how conversations will go, replaying past interactions, or worrying about others' judgments. This mental simulation overload hijacks attention and fuels anxiety, leaving little room for genuine presence. This technique trains you to recognize when your brain has slipped into overdrive, spinning stories, predictions, or critiques about social situations, and to consciously switch it off. You tell yourself, "Not now," or "This is a rehearsal, not reality," and redirect attention back to the present moment or task at hand. By shutting down these mental social simulations, you reclaim mental bandwidth. You stop living in hypothetical dramas and start engaging with real interactions as they happen. This reduces anticipatory anxiety and obsessive self-monitoring, freeing you to be more authentic and relaxed. Over time, the brain rewires to resist unnecessary mental reruns. You become less reactive to imagined social threats and more grounded in what actually unfolds. Social simulation shutdown doesn't erase social awareness. It tempers it, creating a healthy balance between preparation and presence. In a world of constant social noise and judgment, this technique offers quiet liberation, a way to protect your mind from its own worst scenarios so you can navigate relationships with clarity, confidence, and calm. Delayed self-praise. Delayed self-praise is the subtle but transformative habit of postponing immediate self-validation to build deeper, more resilient confidence. Most people either crave instant praise or avoid recognizing their own achievements altogether. This technique teaches you to hold back applause, waiting until your actions prove consistent and meaningful so that praise carries real weight, not fleeting flattery. Instead of rushing to say, "I'm great," right after a small success or fleeting effort, you pause, you let time pass, you observe whether the accomplishment endures, whether the growth is genuine. Only then do you offer yourself recognition, making it a reward rooted in truth rather than impulse. This delay rewires the brain's reward system. Immediate praise often triggers a dopamine hit that quickly fades, leading to a cycle of needing more validation. But delayed praise creates anticipation and builds lasting pride. It teaches patience, humility, and self-awareness. By practicing delayed self-praise, you become less dependent on external approval and more grounded in internal standards. You learn to celebrate real progress instead of momentary wins or empty compliments. Your confidence grows steady, like a flame nurtured over time, not a flash of fireworks. This habit cultivates emotional discipline and reduces the roller coaster of highs and lows tied to praise. It helps you build an unshakable foundation of self-worth, one that isn't easily swayed by passing opinions, but anchored in consistent effort and authentic achievement. Belief cracking. Belief cracking is the mental skill of gently but persistently challenging the rigid ideas and assumptions that limit your growth and distort reality. Most people hold beliefs so tightly they mistake them for unchangeable truths, whether about themselves, others, or the world. These fixed beliefs shape thoughts and behaviors, often without awareness, keeping you stuck in patterns of fear, doubt, or resistance. This technique begins by identifying a core belief that causes pain or blocks progress, like "I'm not good enough," "people can't be trusted," or "I'll never succeed." Instead of accepting it as fact, you start cracking it open with curiosity. Where did this come from? What evidence supports or contradicts it? Is it always true? Belief cracking isn't about demolition, it's about softening. It creates cracks in the mental walls that cage you, letting in light and possibility. By repeatedly questioning and testing these beliefs, the mind becomes flexible. New perspectives emerge. Old narratives lose their power. Over time, this practice rewires how you interpret experience. You shift from victim to investigator, from captive to creator. You learn to hold beliefs lightly, allowing them to evolve rather than imprison. Belief cracking doesn't guarantee easy answers or instant change, but it offers something deeper: freedom. Freedom to question, to grow, and to rebuild your inner world on foundations that serve your true potential rather than fears from the past. Urgency annihilation. Urgency annihilation is the mental mastery of dissolving the pressure of now or never that hijacks calm and clarity. Most people live trapped in an endless loop of urgency, rushing decisions, panicking over deadlines, or feeling overwhelmed by imagined crises. This technique teaches you to disarm that frantic energy by slowing down your internal clock and reclaiming perspective. When the mind screams that everything must happen immediately, urgency annihilation invites a pause, a deliberate step back to question the reality behind the rush. You ask yourself, is this truly urgent? Will this moment matter in a week, a month, a year? This simple reframing fractures the illusion of immediacy and creates breathing room. The power lies in consistent practice. Each time you notice urgency rising, you anchor yourself in the present breath, grounding your nervous system. You prioritize tasks based on real impact rather than emotional panic. You let go of the need to control everything at once. Urgency annihilation isn't about procrastination or ignoring deadlines. It's about refusing to let stress dictate your pace or decisions. It's cultivating calm decisiveness instead of reactive haste. Over time, this rewiring transforms how you handle pressure. The mind no longer spikes into frenzy over every small trigger. You develop an unshakable sense of timing and control, a quiet confidence that everything unfolds as it should. In a world addicted to speed and overload, urgency annihilation gives you the rarest gift: the freedom to act with intention, not impulse, to choose peace over panic, and to move through life on your own steady rhythm. Social mirror rejection. Social mirror rejection is the mental technique of resisting the urge to internalize others' negative judgments or social rejections as reflections of your worth. Humans are wired to seek acceptance, and when faced with criticism or exclusion, most instinctively mirror those feelings back onto themselves, believing, if they reject me, I must be flawed. This internalization fuels self-doubt, shame, and emotional pain. Social mirror rejection teaches you to break that reflex, refusing to absorb the emotional echoes of others' rejection. The process begins by recognizing when someone's negative reaction triggers your inner critic or wounds. Instead of accepting it as truth, you pause and remind yourself, their rejection is about them, not me. You create a mental boundary between external judgment and internal identity. This separation disarms the emotional impact. The sting remains, but it no longer defines you. You learn to view rejection as a reflection of others' perceptions, biases, or states, not as a mirror of your value or potential. With practice, this technique rewires your social resilience. You become less reactive to criticism and more grounded in your own self-worth. You stop chasing approval or fearing exclusion because you know your identity isn't up for negotiation. Social mirror rejection doesn't make you immune to social pain. It simply shifts where you place its power, inside yourself, not in others' hands. In that shift, freedom grows. You step out from the shadows of judgment and stand firm in the light of your own truth. Perspective collapsing. Perspective collapsing is the mental exercise of intentionally breaking down rigid viewpoints to reveal the fluid, interconnected nature of reality. Most people cling tightly to their own perspective, treating it like a fortress that protects identity and certainty. But this rigidity traps the mind, narrowing understanding and fueling conflict. Perspective collapsing invites you to dismantle those walls, not to lose yourself, but to expand who you are. The process begins by questioning assumptions deeply held as absolute truths. You ask, what if the opposite is true? What if there's more than one way to see this? You actively seek out viewpoints that clash with your own, not to argue, but to absorb and integrate. This mental stretching dissolves black and white thinking and invites complexity. This collapse isn't disorientation, it's liberation. When perspectives merge and overlap, the mind stops boxing the world into enemy and ally, right and wrong. It opens to nuance, empathy, and curiosity. You begin to see yourself in others and others in yourself. Repeated practice rewires cognitive flexibility. The brain becomes less reactive, more adaptive. You move through disagreement with grace instead of defensiveness. You choose connection over division. Perspective collapsing doesn't erase identity, it refines it. By collapsing fixed views, you rebuild a richer, more resilient sense of self, one capable of holding contradictions and thriving in uncertainty. In that collapse, the mind expands and freedom blooms. False urgency exposure. False urgency exposure is the mental practice of recognizing and diffusing the overwhelming pressure of imagined deadlines and crises that don't actually require immediate action. Most people live caught in a constant state of hurry, their brains tricked into believing that every task is a life or death emergency. This false urgency fuels stress, anxiety, and burnout, robbing clarity and slowing effective decision-making. This technique begins by identifying moments when the mind declares a false emergency. Thoughts like, I have to finish this now, or if I don't respond immediately, everything will fall apart. Instead of reacting, you pause and expose these urgencies for what they are, mental smoke alarms, often disconnected from reality. By repeatedly facing these false urgencies and choosing calm instead of panic, you teach your nervous system that most pressures are manageable, not catastrophic. You train yourself to slow down, prioritize rationally, and act with intention rather than impulse. Over time, this exposure rewires your stress response. You develop the ability to discern real emergencies from imagined ones. The flood of adrenaline subsides, replaced by steady focus and balanced energy. False urgency exposure isn't about procrastination. It's about reclaiming control over your time and attention. It frees you to respond when necessary, rest when needed, and approach life with a clarity that only comes from refusing to live in constant crisis. In this freedom, effectiveness and peace coexist. Past self-forgiveness drill. Past self-forgiveness drill is the transformative practice of releasing resentment, guilt, and judgment toward who you once were, recognizing that your past mistakes don't define your present worth. Most people carry heavy burdens from their history, replaying failures or regrets as if they're permanent stains. This mental drill invites you to step back and treat your past self with the compassion you deserve, unlocking freedom to move forward. The drill begins by consciously acknowledging specific moments where you feel blame or shame. Instead of pushing those feelings deeper or punishing yourself, you hold them gently in awareness. You speak inwardly to that younger version with kindness. I forgive you for what you didn't know, or you did the best you could then. This practice doesn't erase responsibility, but it softens self-condemnation. It rewires harsh internal narratives that keep you stuck in cycles of regret. Forgiving your past self creates space for growth rather than self-sabotage. Repeating this drill strengthens emotional resilience. Each time old wounds arise, you meet them not with blame, but with grace. You break the habit of self-punishment and replace it with self-acceptance. Over time, past self-forgiveness transforms your relationship with memory. The past becomes a teacher, not a jailer. You carry lessons without the weight of regret, and your present self gains the freedom to thrive, unburdened by yesterday's mistakes. Fear to task conversion. Fear to task conversion is the transformative mental practice of turning the energy of fear into a clear, actionable mission. Most people experience fear as a paralyzing force, something to avoid or suppress. This trick flips that instinct by teaching you to listen to fear as a signal pointing toward what needs attention, then channel that energy into purposeful action rather than hesitation. The process begins by noticing fear's presence, not denying it, not running from it. You ask, what is this fear trying to protect me from? What task is it urging me to do? Instead of fleeing, you treat fear as a compass, directing you toward growth, preparation, confrontation, learning, or change. This shift turns adrenaline from a threat into fuel. Instead of freezing, your mind sharpens. Instead of doubting, you plan. The nervous system moves from fight or flight to focus and act. By converting fear into a task, you reclaim control over your response. You become proactive, not reactive. Fear no longer holds you hostage. It becomes a call to prepare, to solve, to move forward. Repeated practice deepens this rewiring. Fear's power diminishes because it's no longer a warning to retreat, but a prompt to engage. This transforms anxiety into momentum, uncertainty into strategy, and hesitation into progress. Fear to task conversion doesn't erase fear, it redefines your relationship with it. And in that redefinition lies a rare kind of courage, the ability to use fear not as a barrier, but as a bridge to what you truly want. Regret to ritual. Regret to ritual is the powerful mental shift that transforms the heavy weight of past mistakes into a source of daily strength and growth. Most people carry regret like a chain, endlessly replaying what went wrong, punishing themselves for choices made. This technique turns that cycle upside down by converting regret into intentional, constructive rituals that heal and propel forward. Instead of drowning in if-only thoughts, you create a small, repeated action that honors the lesson regret offers. Maybe it's a morning reflection on what you've learned, a journaling habit to release what can't be changed, or a simple breath practice to reclaim presence when old pain surfaces. These rituals don't erase the past, but give it purpose, transforming regret from a sinking anchor into a steady compass. The magic lies in repetition. Each time the ritual is practiced, it rewires the brain to associate regret, not with shame, but with mindful change. You break the loop of self-blame and open a path towards self-compassion and resilience. Regret to ritual doesn't deny pain. It meets it head-on and wraps it in care. It acknowledges that mistakes happened, but they don't have to define you. Instead, they can teach you to act differently with more wisdom and kindness toward yourself. Over time, this transformation shifts your relationship with the past. Regret becomes not a prison, but a ritualized reminder that growth is possible and that every day offers a chance to rewrite your story with intention and grace. Shame as curiosity fuel. Shame as curiosity fuel is the mental alchemy of transforming the heavy weight of shame into a catalyst for exploration and growth. Most people react to shame with avoidance, denial, or self-criticism, treating it like a poisonous stain that must be hidden or scrubbed away. This technique, however, teaches you to lean into shame with a curious mind, turning what feels like a trap into a doorway. The practice begins by noticing shame without judgment. Instead of drowning in the story of, "I'm bad," you ask, "What is shame trying to show me?" You become an investigator of your own feelings, peeling back layers to understand the beliefs, experiences, or fears beneath the surface. This shift from shame to curiosity breaks the cycle of self-condemnation. Curiosity softens shame's grip by replacing blame with inquiry. It opens space for compassion and insight, transforming shame from a silent jailer into an active teacher. Repeatedly using shame as a prompt for curiosity rewires emotional response. The shame doesn't disappear overnight, but its intensity decreases as you learn to engage with it constructively rather than reactively. Over time, this mental habit fosters resilience. You become willing to face uncomfortable truths, not with fear, but with an open heart and mind. Shame loses its power to paralyze and instead becomes a guidepost on the path of self-understanding and healing. In this way, shame as curiosity fuel turns one of the darkest emotions into a source of light, a tool for growth that only those willing to look closely can wield. Intensity as illusion filter. Intensity as illusion filter is the mental skill of recognizing that the overwhelming force of emotion often distorts reality, and learning to see through that distortion to the underlying truth. Most people mistake intense feelings, rage, panic, despair, as accurate reflections of their situation, letting the flood of emotion cloud judgment and fuel impulsive reactions. This technique teaches you to treat intensity as a veil, not a verdict. When emotions surge, you practice stepping back mentally and observing the intensity itself, not just the thoughts or events that sparked it. You ask, is this feeling magnifying the truth? Is it coloring my perception with exaggeration or fear? This pause creates a filter, separating raw emotion from facts. This filter doesn't deny what you feel. It acknowledges the power of emotion, but refuses to let it rewrite reality. You learn to tolerate the discomfort of intensity while holding on to perspective, choosing response over reaction. By repeatedly applying this illusion filter, your brain rewires how it processes high-stakes moments. The storms inside become less threatening, and clarity breaks through the chaos. Over time, intensity loses its ability to hijack your mind. You become fluent in reading emotional signals without mistaking them for absolute truth. This skill frees you from the trap of feeling overwhelmed, allowing you to navigate life's highs and lows with calm presence and grounded wisdom. Emotional permission revocation. Emotional permission revocation is the powerful mental practice of withdrawing the unconscious approval you give to destructive or unhelpful emotions. Most people experience emotions like anger, resentment, or jealousy as inevitable forces that must be acted upon or endured. This technique teaches you to refuse permission, silently telling those emotions they no longer have a say in how you think, speak, or behave. It begins by recognizing when a toxic emotion rises and consciously deciding not to let it control your reactions. Instead of letting anger dictate your words or choices, you mentally revoke its license to rule your mind. You don't deny feeling it, but you deny it permission to hijack your day. This revocation is a form of inner boundary setting. It's telling emotions, you're here, but you don't own me. It requires practice and firmness, as old emotional patterns resist losing their grip. But each time you refuse permission, you build a muscle of emotional sovereignty. Over time, this habit rewires the brain's emotional circuits. Intense feelings still surface, but they become signals rather than orders. You learn to witness emotions without becoming them, allowing feelings to pass without unnecessary drama or damage. Emotional permission revocation doesn't suppress your humanity, it sharpens it. It turns emotional chaos into clarity and impulsiveness into intentionality. And in that shift lies freedom, the freedom to feel deeply, yet act wisely on your own terms. Mental minimalism. Mental minimalism is the deliberate practice of simplifying your inner world by stripping away unnecessary thoughts, distractions, and mental noise to create a clear, focused mind. Most people allow their brains to become cluttered with endless information, worries, and competing priorities, which drains energy and clouds judgment. This technique teaches you to cultivate less mental chatter so that what remains has purpose and clarity. The practice begins with awareness, identifying thoughts, commitments, or habits that don't serve your goals or well-being. You then consciously let go of these mental burdens, creating space for the essential. It's like decluttering a crowded room. The less that fills the space, the more noticeable and impactful what remains becomes. Mental minimalism isn't about avoiding complexity or ignoring challenges. It's about choosing where to invest attention so your mind isn't overwhelmed by the trivial. This focus sharpens decision-making, reduces stress, and enhances creativity by giving the brain room to breathe. By regularly pruning mental clutter, you train your nervous system to resist distraction and default to calm, purposeful thought. Over time, this practice rewires your brain to value quality over quantity in thinking and feeling. Mental minimalism creates an inner environment where clarity, presence, and intentionality thrive. It's not just a strategy, it becomes a way of being, allowing you to navigate life's chaos with simplicity and grace, focused only on what truly matters. Clarity through chaos simulation. Clarity through chaos simulation is the mental training of immersing yourself safely and deliberately in imagined or controlled chaos to build resilience and sharpen decision-making under pressure. Most people freeze or panic when faced with disorder, uncertainty, or crisis because their minds haven't been prepared for the unpredictable. This technique rewires the brain by rehearsing chaos in advance, turning confusion into clarity. The practice begins by visualizing or creating controlled scenarios where multiple challenges collide: noise, deadlines, unexpected setbacks. Instead of fleeing from the overwhelm, you observe how your mind reacts. You test responses, adjust strategies, and practice calming your nervous system amidst the storm. This simulated chaos activates the brain's problem-solving circuits and trains emotional regulation. The more often you expose yourself to manageable chaos, the less threatening real chaos feels. Your mind learns that clarity can emerge within confusion, not only after it. The power lies in repetition. Like a firefighter drills for a blaze, you condition your brain to navigate high-pressure moments with presence and precision. You develop a mental blueprint for staying grounded when everything else feels off balance. Over time, clarity through chaos simulation transforms your relationship with stress and uncertainty. You stop avoiding discomfort and start seeking growth in it. You become someone who doesn't just survive the storm, but finds direction inside it. And that ability to stay clear when all else is unclear becomes your greatest advantage in an unpredictable world. Emotional dial practice. Emotional dial practice is the conscious skill of tuning your feelings like a radio, turning the volume up, down, or switching channels to match the moment and your goals. Most people experience emotions as uncontrollable waves that crash and overwhelm, leaving them at the mercy of mood swings. This technique teaches you to become the DJ of your inner world, mastering emotional intensity instead of being mastered by it. The practice begins with awareness, noticing where your emotional dial is set. Are you dialed too high, overwhelmed by anxiety, anger, or excitement, or too low, numb, disconnected, or sluggish. Once you identify the current setting, you use tools like breath, focus, movement, or thought to adjust. Slow breathing can dial anxiety down. Positive memories or physical activity can dial energy up. Over time, this tuning becomes intuitive. You learn to shift emotional states intentionally, rising to meet challenges with vigor or calming down to make clear decisions. You gain the ability to regulate your mood instead of being pulled by it. This practice rewires neural pathways connected to emotional regulation. Each deliberate adjustment strengthens control, resilience, and presence. It transforms emotions from chaotic forces into instruments you play with skill and intention. Emotional dial practice doesn't eliminate feelings, it harmonizes them. It helps you respond rather than react, flow rather than freeze. In mastering this inner dial, you gain freedom, the freedom to feel deeply while staying steady, to navigate life's highs and lows with grace and power.